passes like a motorcycle.
Or next month?
300.
You got it covered?
Yeah.
You'll be here?
I'll be here.
Okay.
I don't have anything exciting. Bluebird.
Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's Monday, August 7th. This is the meeting of the Transportation Commission. Our first order of business is approval of the July 10th meeting minutes. Have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll second.
The motion's been made by Commissioner Hamby, seconded by Commissioner Storm to approve the July 10 meeting minutes. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? Motion passes. The next item on our agenda is general public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any item or issue that's not scheduled on our regular agenda. What questions do we have from the public today? Come on forward and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sally Ropey. Thank you all for meeting tonight. I appreciate your time. I was out of town when you guys met about Leonard Avenue. I think I missed that meeting. And there have been many requests for traffic calming on our street. I've lived there for 7 years, and honestly, I think it's gotten worse in just that short amount of time that I've been there. And, there are no sidewalks on that street either side, and no curbs or anything. And so when cars are coming by, if you're walking on the street, you're walking in a ditch. And you better go fast because sometimes people go down there 50 miles an hour. We've got a guy that works for a wrecker, and he has this huge long truck, and he hauls. I can tell when he's turned onto 15th Street and he's just starting to come down Leonard because he hits the gas and goes ASAP until he gets to Forest and starts going. What is that? Which direction does that be? East. And it's just like, and he has a child. And we have a lot of children in the neighborhood, and I'm an old person, and I work right on the street, and sometimes cars will come this close to me just to prove the point that they're in the car. And, that feels precarious to me. And I just want to know, have you guys decided anything about Leonard Avenue and what would be done in that, between 15th and 19th?
Well, the request was approved last month. What has to still happen, though, is the funding has to be allocated for the project, and then the design of the traffic calming
And do you
would
know
have to also be decided.
what kind of thing that they're going to do for that? Will it be speed bumps, or will it be something a little bit more?
That's determined after the project gets funding allocated for it.
And is that something that gets discussed with the neighborhood, or is that just a decision from you guys?
Yeah, Dave, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, our normal process is after the traffic calming request is approved and it's approved by the city commission, it goes on our list of projects, and as funds are, as we get funding, we would follow up with the neighborhood at the time and get in touch
Right.
with the neighbors, and the policy states that a certain 70% of neighbors within I think it's 300 feet within the device would need to approve before that's installed.
Okay.
In some instances, we look beyond that 300 feet to get input as well. So
Okay.
there'll be a lot of discussions. And then before we proceeded with construction, the project would go back through the Transportation Commission and City Commission before
Okay.
construction. So
And when do you think that process will start up again, when they're actually looking at what devices they'll be using? Will that be a year from now, or?
Well, the Transportation Commission approved the request at last month's meeting. I believe it will be on the City Commission agenda here, I believe next week for their approval. Then it'll go on the list and we'll rank it with the other projects on the list.
I see.
Currently, there's approximately $200,000 in the budget each of for this year, and I think again for next year for traffic calming. So we'll start at the top of the list since there's a priority ranking system, and then if it ranks really high, then it would happen sooner rather than later. But
Great.
we would eventually get to it. Is the goal.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you. That's super. I appreciate that.
So just to be clear, that list of projects, it has, a few years ago, it had a couple dozen projects on there that hadn't been funded for years and years. So the City Commission has budgeted money the last 2 years, so they're starting to be able to chip away at that project list. So it really depends on the City Commission continue to fund traffic calming projects. As long as they do fund it, then that list of projects can be worked on. And
How does that come about, tax money, or is there a shortage?
essentially, yeah, it's just in their budget, which, is through property taxes, sales tax, other fees they use. What other questions do we have from the public today? Or any comments? Please come forward. Introduce yourself and share your thoughts.
Hello, my name is Tyra Kalman, and I believe that our issue is on the agenda, so does that mean that I cannot speak to it today?
If it's on the agenda, we just ask you to wait until the issue
Okay.
is discussed then.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other comments from the public? Okay. Move on to our third item on the agenda. This is the traffic calming and speed limit request for Forest Avenue between Barker Avenue and Leonard Avenue.
Hello, I'm Zach Baker. I'm a project engineer on staff here at the City of Lawrence Public Works Department. We received a request, this I believe was in February of 2017, for traffic calming and/or traffic speed reduction on Forest Avenue between Barker and Leonard Avenue. So this May, we took traffic counts and speed data and cut through counts in between this block. And I guess a little bit of background information. This street is classified as a local street. Speed limit is 30 miles an hour. It is not a safe route to school. It is not on a bus or transit route. It is on the Douglas County Bikeway Plan and is signed as such. And there is no sidewalk on either side of the street. No curb and gutters, so drainage is just like a V-ditch drainage. And it's a fairly narrow street, about 20 feet across. Traffic counts on this street, well, let me go through the criteria in order for traffic calming to be considered. There's a few conditions. If the 85th percentile speed is 5 miles or greater than the posted speed, then traffic calming can be considered. If 24-hour two-way counts is greater than 1,000 cars for a 24-hour period on a local street, or if cut-through traffic comprises more than 50% of the traffic during the peak hour of the day. So from what our data we collected in May, 24-hour traffic counts is 171 vehicles in a day. It's well below the threshold of 1,000 vehicles. The 85th percentile speed is 28 miles an hour. That's 2 less than what the posted speed would be. However, cut-through data did barely meet minimum criteria, 8 cars in that out of 15 during a peak hour of a day. However, staff is still recommending the denial of traffic calming on the street, and further reason is just because it is such a very small number of cars throughout the day. It barely meets the criteria for cut-through traffic. And at that, I will entertain any questions.
What questions do we have?
Is there any accident history or anything on the stretch?
Not that we could find.
Okay.
Parking is allowed, so if you're a pedestrian in the street, you know, you have to weave in and around cars if they're out there on the street. I think probably the fact that parking is allowed on there might be why speeds are relatively, you know, small in that area. I would also point out, I don't know if you guys had received some of our email correspondence that I think was passed to you today, but I just wanted to bring to your attention, there was, I got a couple of emails, one from a Sam and Nancy Perkins who did advocate for, I don't know if they're here tonight or not, but they did advocate for traffic calming through here. They have children ages 7 and 14 that they know walk and play in the street. You know, they obviously they would prefer that cars not cut through their block and or have lower speed limits. I also had a phone call from a Sandy Perkins, or no, that was a different one. Where was this? It was the house on the corner of Forest and Barker, and she was indifferent on adding traffic calming. She didn't think it needed it. She said mostly it's just a kind of a quiet block, but she does see bicyclists go up and down the road. So,
Which corner was that on?
southeast corner of Barker and Forest Avenue.
Those houses frontage on Barker, not Forest.
Her driveway is on Barker. Her house is on the street frontage of Forest
None of the
Avenue.
houses on the corners, the 4 corners at both ends are on.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Forest.
yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
I just got one general question. How are speed limits generally set on properties like this?
The speed limit by state law is 30 miles per hour on residential streets unless it's signed otherwise. It can be signed otherwise through adoption of a local ordinance. So for local streets such as this, I don't believe there's a sign out there that says 30, but it's signed, the speed limit is 30 miles per hour unless posted differently.
Zach, I remember last month when we were looking at Leonard Avenue, you had data that suggested several people exceeded 50 miles an hour. Is that the case on Forest?
We did not see that. Speeds generally were below 30 miles an hour. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, the top one between 30 and 40. That would have been an outlier that would have probably raised the average up a little bit, but as a rule, speed was not a deciding factor on this one. The only thing that did meet the criteria was the cut-through traffic.
And for the cut-through traffic, is that just defined as somebody that, for this particular block? of
Yeah,
Forest,
so
they
it's
didn't go to park in a house?
Yeah, well, so cut-through is essentially people not living on the block. If someone, so what we do is we have people at each end of the block, and they're writing down license plates and counting cars as they're going through. We get each other's notes, and license plates that make it all the way through the block is essentially cutting through and not stopping at a home in that block. So, you know, if there's a license that's taken down that's just going to park and going to home from, you know, the day after work, that car's not counted. I mean, it's counted on the 24-hour counts, but as far as the cut-through data is, those wouldn't be. So in this case, there was a total of 15 cars during the peak hour of the day, and about half of them were cut-through traffic.
What's considered the peak hour of the day? Is that morning or evening?
Most places, it is like 4:30 to 5:30 in the PM after work hours. Occasionally, you know, if a place is near a school, sometimes it's different, but generally it's the PM peak hour.
Zach, I think I'll just quickly comment because I'm on this Forest Avenue a couple of times a day on a bicycle. And granted, it's pretty early in the morning, probably before a peak time. From a bicyclist perspective, it's a pretty peaceful street. And even the folks that live there do park their driveways. Most of the homes have driveways, I think, so there's a pretty clear shot through there, which doesn't help in terms of traffic calming, but from a bike's perspective, both Barker and Leonard have some pretty high speeds, and we've addressed that on Leonard. And the challenges for bikes is really negotiating the Barker and Leonard intersections from Forest. But right on Forest, in this location, and also east of Leonard, it's pretty peaceful from my perspective. But I'm just there, you know, certain time of day when you would expect that. But thought I'd share that.
All right, thank you, Zach. Is there anybody from the public, perhaps maybe from the neighborhood, that would like to speak on this issue?
Yes, my name is Kerry Altenburn. I'm the one that put in the request originally. I had a question, actually several questions of staff. When were the counts taken? What were the dates?
It was on Tuesday, between Tuesday. Counts were taken on Tuesday, May 9th to Wednesday, May 10th. I recall.
Both counts, the electronic counts and?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And those were what dates were those?
The May 9th and May 10th, that was a
Times,
Tuesday.
days of the week?
The days of the week was a Tuesday and a Wednesday.
Okay. During that time, my neighbor over here was having her sewer line replaced. And it was blocked off for a significant amount of time. I know because I saw that they were working on there and you couldn't get through the street. So that absolutely had an effect on the traffic count, at least the electronic ones. I don't know exactly what time of the day they were doing the manual counts, but by that time they were done with their work for the day. So it's incorrect data as far as the electronic. It would be higher if they had it done at the right time. And I thought it interesting that they were actually doing it at that time. It was kind of suspicious. I've lived on that street now for 31 years, and traffic has increased more and more on that street. 28 miles an hour is not the average speed, at least during some times of the day. And at peak times of the day, you're saying the cut-through is such, but if you add up the cut-throughs on there, because perhaps the peak time of the day is when the neighbors are coming and going from their jobs. But people cut through there all the time, day and night. This may be just my observation, but that is not a safe street. We have no sidewalks. We have no way of getting away from the cars except stepping into the ditch or into somebody's yard. And a lot of people drive down that street who do not live there act like they own the street. And they're annoyed when we drive slower than they want us to go, when we pull out of our driveways and drive down the street. Supposedly, we don't meet the criteria, but I know the criteria can be put aside when it's necessary. When we requested years and years ago to put the traffic light at 17th in Massachusetts because Cordley kids were crossing the street there, and a woman at Babcock Place had been run over. It didn't meet the criteria either. But the commission at the time decided that because of what was going on there, that the criteria would be overruled because of hazards. And those hazards are there. It is a local street, and a very local street. It is a walkway from people going both ways. People walk their kids to school both directions. People bike a lot. It's a connection, I think, to the Burroughs Trail, because you walk down Forest Avenue and then you go over to the other branch of Forest Avenue and you go on the bridge and you're out on the trail. Pedestrian data wasn't taken, I'm assuming. I think that might be a good thing, because the traffic on that street is not just vehicular, it is pedestrian. I would suggest that the commission, if they're not 100% certain that the traffic was done at the right time, might even request that staff redo the survey at a more convenient and maybe a more representative time, and maybe leave it on a little longer, and not do it when part of the street's blocked for a significant amount of the time that it's being done. I see no reason why you couldn't lower it to 20, even if it didn't quite meet the criteria. Main Street, between 6th and 9th, is 20 miles an hour, and they have curbs, and they have gutters, and they have sidewalks. But it was requested years ago that that be lowered down, and it was. And Main Street's a wide street during there, and Forest is not a wide street. And there are no traffic, there's never been a speed limit sign anywhere near on Forest, or mostly on Leonard or Barker. People pretty much drive the speed they want to. So I would request that, regardless of what the staff has requested, that a minimum of 20 miles an hour be on that speed limit. I'd say 15, but I don't know if you can lower it to that. It's not so much that the pedestrians are walking on a vehicular street. I'd say it's vehicles are driving on a pedestrian street. And because of that, it's a hazard. No one's been killed, thank goodness, but it's just waiting to happen. And if you don't believe it, come over and walk up and down in front of my house during peak hours and see what you think. Thank you.
Thank you. What other questions are there from the public or comments?
Hello, my name's Kathleen Christian, and I live on Forest Avenue. I've lived there for 10 years. I actually live across the street from Cary. And I have a huge window in the front of my house, so I see cars. I have a bird's eye view of cars. And I can tell you right now, in 10 or 15 minutes, I can count at least 10 cars. But I mean, I've had a lot of close calls. And I guess I'm also concerned about the assessment that was made in May. I just think it needs to be done at a different time, preferably even from now till, October, because everybody, the kids are coming back to college, school's picking up, and we get a lot of traffic in the morning with people cutting through, taking their kids to school and such. And, all streets have an ebb and flow of traffic. But it only takes one car, one renegade to hit somebody. And there's been a lot of close calls. When I first moved there and my grandson was younger, he almost got hit by a car. He was only 6 at the time. And so I would never allow him to go in the front yard because I was always afraid he'd get hit by one of those cars. But the problem with Forest Avenue is every time there's construction on any of the streets in the surrounding neighborhood, Forest Avenue is always designated as the detour route. And so then people start coming down there and they get addicted to it and they think, wow, this is a easy cut through. And then there you go. You got every car in the neighborhood on their way to Dillon's right through Forest Avenue. And it's too short of a street to be 30 miles an hour. I don't even drive 30 miles an hour down that street. I drive less than 10 miles an hour because I always see cats. Sometimes I see a dog. kids, bicyclers, people walking from Dillon's, you know, they walk through, or people walking their dogs down the street. I'm always aware of you know, the foot traffic, and I'm always afraid of somebody getting hurt, you know, or one of the animals getting hit. And my point about it is, you know, when I mow my yard, I literally have a fear. I'm constantly looking behind me thinking there's going to be a car to hit me. If that was a safe street, I wouldn't have that fear in me. But the fear is real. And they do go down that street like a fast. In fact, there was a Ford Focus that just went down there just last week, and she was in a hurry. Of course, I yell at them, you know, slow down. My grandson and I used to take chalk and write chalk on slow down on both directions just to get people to slow down. So Carrie mentioned about when we're pulling in and out of our driveway, if there's a car coming down there that's cutting through, yeah, they have an entitled attitude, as if, how dare us stop and block them from coming through. And I mean, somebody yelled at me one day, and I looked at them and I said, well, you know, take another route. This isn't a cut-through street. This is a residential street. Slow down. I mean, I don't understand why people don't understand that, but that's just the way it is. I just feel the speed limit needs to be dropped down, even if it's 15 miles an hour or 20. It needs to be lowered. And I would really like to see speed humps on there on both ends, because I think it would really slow people down and would discourage them from using that as a cut-through street. We would really like it to stay a quiet street, because it is a very nice neighborhood to live in. And thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Does she want to speak? All right. Hey, we encourage all ages here. How old is she? 4, that's impressive. It might be the youngest ever. Anybody else? Okay, so I'd like to bring it back to the commission for discussion. What do we still need to learn about this request?
So, just as a nature of assessing where we are, and if you look at the next item, you'll find that just reducing the speed limits will not reduce the speed on the street. That said, if there's concern about the data not being correct, then I would support re-looking at that. They're still pretty far away from hitting 1,000 vehicles per day at 171, so I don't think we're missing 800 vehicles a day by those counts. I'm afraid if you recount it, then your cut-through traffic may actually drop below that 50%. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Well, I'll ask a few questions, I guess. Dave, do you think there's any signage solution that would make a difference? Pedestrian signs, anything in that arena that would be worth considering?
Signs are only as good as those that obey them. Lowering the speed limit and signing it at a lower speed limit is not likely to affect the speed of traffic. We'll have another item here next that we've lowered the speed limit on the street, and the before-after data is pretty much the same as far as speeds go. So if you're looking to effectively calm down traffic to a lower speed, like 20 miles per hour, the effective way to do that would be through traffic calming measures such as speed humps or other devices. Is
there any plan in the sidewalk gap program for I suppose it's a pretty wide area in Barker that would include Leonard, Barker, and side streets like Forest. I meant to look at that to see if there's any, although I know the sidewalk budget is a totally different discussion, but is that in your sidewalk gap analysis at all?
I don't believe that this street is. Like any other request, we could look at how, we're getting ready to talk later tonight about bicycle and pedestrian priority funding and how to prioritize the funds that we have to different streets based off different criteria. So we're not there yet with the criteria, but this section's just a local street. I think one of the challenges with it is there's no curb and gutter and very little right of way. So
Right.
you have a narrow street, parking on both sides, and then homes. So there's not much right of way. So there'd be a lot of challenges to do that without reconfiguring the street. You could take a lane off. You could have just eastbound or westbound traffic, and stripe or put a curb in and have a sidewalk where the roadway's at. So there are all those options, but
Sure.
At this point, to maintain traffic both directions and get a sidewalk, it'd be very difficult to do and expensive without buying a right of way. We haven't looked at it again. I don't think this has been identified on any of our gap projects or on our list to do. But.
And I know at the risk of asking a dumb question, a one-way approach to a street like this would certainly cut down on the traffic. I think the neighborhood probably would be pretty inconvenienced by that, but it certainly would make a difference. Now, from a traffic engineer's perspective, I don't know if that's realistic at all, but it would be, probably make a difference in the number of cars.
Well, if the concern is cut through traffic, we have used traffic diverters on streets to reduce cut through traffic. So you essentially have a two-way street, but at the end of a block, you would not allow entry to the street, so you could only get out. That's in the traffic calming toolbox to use diverters. So if it did get approved and was on the traffic calming list, that would be an option to look at. So I think it just depends on the neighborhood as a whole and the folks that live on the street of what device they would prefer to use if it does get approved for traffic calming. So it's an option.
Conceptually, what would a diverter look like if you did diverters on both ends of Forest there?
Well, a diverter would be similar to what we have at 6th and Schwartz Road on the north side of the street. We have one out here at 7th and Rhode Island. I think
It would just be on one end, though. It wouldn't be on.
It would be on one. Yeah, it would be on one end.
So you'd basically be able to leave in a direction, but you couldn't enter in that same direction.
Correct.
So it effectively makes it's two-way for the people that live there, I think. You okay?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
But you can't pass the road.
Yeah.
But then when they come home, they cannot go on the one-way.
Right.
Or you
Right.
could, this is not really necessarily traffic calming, but if the concern was not to have a sidewalk, you could have a one-way street and reduce the width of the street and be able to provide a sidewalk. Narrow the
Right.
street up, still
Right.
have the parking. Because I think that's another concern with the neighbors there have on-street parking. So if you were to get a sidewalk, there's at some point there's a trade-off that you'd have to determine what's the best use of the right-of-way without acquiring right-of-way.
So the way I understand this then is if we don't approve traffic calming or further study, then there's not a possibility to look at a diverter because it's part of the toolbox. Am I?
Correct. Yeah, if it's not approved for traffic calming, then we would not pursue looking at a diverter.
Okay.
So would a could one, making the street one way be problematic, just looking at the map here? Because it doesn't appear 16th goes through, or 17th goes through, or 18th goes through. Okay, does it go? Yeah, I'm just thinking, if you live in the neighborhood, you might have a ways to go around to get right in, right out. Yeah.
And I would say though, I mean, I mentioned the one way, I mean, that it's not a traffic calming measure.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
one-way streets generally increase speeds, but you would be able to have room to have a pedestrian walkway and narrow the street, so you didn't need 2 lanes of traffic. So I think as pertains to this specific request on speed limit and traffic calming, I mean, I think that's changing a street to a one-way is a separate issue. But the diverter is a traffic calming item, and so that would, it still have two-way traffic, but limit the cut-through traffic.
Well, lastly for me, I think, is I know we've talked about some other areas in town that either did or did not meet the criteria for the traffic calming policy. And if you look at this area on Forest, how many other places in Lawrence are there that we could say, well, gee, if we do it here, maybe we should do it in other locations? And I think last month you guys came up with some really good data on, various levels of I guess I'd say potential for traffic calming opportunities. And for me, I think there's probably a lot of situations like this in Lawrence. Maybe I'm wrong, but certainly in East Lawrence there are, and in the Barker and probably Brook Creek also. So there's probably similar situation to this in a lot of locations, for what that's worth.
I have a couple general questions. First, I want to say I kind of agree with that. I mean, I feel like there just about every street in Lawrence you could do some traffic calming if you really look at it from like considering pedestrians and bicyclists. So it kind of makes things complicated. I've had a lot of thoughts. I feel like this is really hard to have yes or no answers to. But one of the questions I have is there somewhere we could look to that actually discusses the research? Like, I've pretty much believed for as long as I've been involved in these things that the way the road is designed really dictates how it is used and speeds on it. And I still do, but after spending the summer in 3 different countries with 3 different cultures and different habits, I don't believe it as much as I used to. And so I was wondering if there's a place we could look that really discusses that or points to research that says I feel like even on a road this short, it was amazing to hear I'm very familiar with this road because my in-laws live just down the street from it, so we've used this road a lot my family's used this road a lot to get to the bike path. And it is actually kind of amazing to me that cars can get to 28 miles per hour on such a small stretch, and that's the 85th percentile. I can't imagine going much over 20 on that. And so just that people are driving 30 miles an hour on a road that honestly feels like it couldn't be designed for much more than 20 is amazing, because I feel like it's already designed for slower speeds and people are going almost 30. So I was just wondering if there's something we could look at to kind of a citation, I guess, on how much size and stuff like that changes speeds or anything. If there's any research that, maybe not for this one, but for future. So that's one question I have. The next question is what are the neighbors asking? If it's just for the 20 mile per hour sign, how much is that? Is it worth just trying and seeing if that does the trick? Because it seems that would be a very low cost method rather than diverters, or I don't know. what the like ramifications of that would be. So like what exactly would the neighbors want? Is that something that would be good to look at? And I understand that there's criteria that needs to be met, and this meets most of the criteria. So I can appreciate that because there's some way you have to evaluate whether you should put traffic calming on it. And based on the criteria, I would have to vote against traffic calming. But I also think this is, come up before, like at what point do we start examining whether our criteria needs to be changed or I don't know, looked at more closely. And I say that only because he said you could look at this more as a pedestrian street that cars are using. And I thought that was very powerful because I've used that street a lot, and that's really what it feels like. It feels like a pedestrian street that, cars are using, so.
I'd like to just know, do we have other areas of the community that have the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in neighborhoods?
Yes.
Okay. And has that created any problems?
I don't have any examples for you.
Okay.
We could look into it and see what streets what streets are assigned at 20 miles per hour, but
for me, this this road is small, and if you've been on it, it's a great place to ride your bike. And in the pedestrian bike issues task force, this road was specifically called out for future consideration as a bicycle boulevard to connect people to the Burroughs Creek Trail. So I think this road, unlike a lot of other residential streets that might need calming, has some unique considerations for what it could be for our future, for our community. I am also surprised that anybody can drive very fast on that road. The times I've been on it, it wouldn't feel safe at all to drive fast. So this kind of data does kind of make me wonder, like, how does that even happen? But I was also surprised people were driving 50 miles an hour faster on Leonard. So,
so if you put a 20-mile-per-hour sign there, and if it is, as they say, that nobody follows it, and people are still driving 28, then if you go back and do the study, then it's already met A of the 85th percentile speed.
right, which is the next case we'll look at is a situation like that, where the speed limit was first dropped, and that didn't fix, and then they're back with a traffic calming request.
Yeah.
So,
to me, saying that putting a sign up doesn't really make a difference, it kind of does, because it puts it back in the spotlight
yeah.
at some point.
Yeah, it's clear that it does that. I also think Aaron's question or comment really about the need for us to review the traffic calming policy. Right now, there's really not consideration given for all the other context of the street, like whether it has sidewalks or not, whether it's used by bicyclists and pedestrians. And we didn't get that information, in the memo. It was really just presented by other commissioners and the public. I think it's important that we get counts about how those streets being used, including people that are walking and biking on the street. And that's, part of our charge is to think about the totality of the transportation system. And I think it is great to see that, it's a bike route identified in the plan. But as we're doing counts, that's information that would probably be helpful. I'm not sure how hard it would be for staff to do that, but, just knowing anecdotally that some of us have used it and, have our own observations it'd be helpful to have some record of that, to say, here's the pedestrian count data, bike count data. I know the MPO does track some locations for bike ped counts every year. I don't know if this one's on there. Yeah, I don't think so. That might be a good point for future bike ped counting, just to know if it's really does have a lot of use, rather than just what we're thinking it does or what the neighborhood thinks.
I think that's a valid point, is that there are no sidewalks on this street. And it's a narrow street, and it's short. And people go really fast on my street, and I wish they'd slow down. But I do have a sidewalk that I can walk down, so I think that's pretty important. And, I mean, it is really a big thoroughfare for pedestrians, walking places like Dillon's.
All right. Is there anything else we want to ask or know before we make a decision? Is there anybody in the public that wants to say anything else about this before we decide?
I've spoken to this group before. I really want you folks to succeed. But if you're going to just follow the engineering criteria, which is extremely valid and strong, there's no reason for you to exist. They could do that in an office. Like some of you have been saying, you need to put it in a larger context. This is a very quiet street, no sidewalks. The fact that it doesn't have a high volume of traffic is not as important as the behavior of the traffic. Even if it's just one car in the morning and one car in the afternoon, if it's going too fast and you have a pedestrian situation like no sidewalks on a narrow street, that should be part of the discussion. I would not wait for more data. That'll take a year. Do it now. And just when you make your recommendation, say to the city that this is beyond the engineering criteria, but we decided this as a recommendation because you don't have to just follow the engineering criteria. That's not what you're here for. If you look at your bylaws, the very first paragraph says multimodal, and yet none of this has multimodal discussion. I looked through the agenda, none of it does. And if you look at your policies, they are not multimodal either. I mean, saying things like there are not enough pedestrians to warrant a crosswalk. What pedestrian in their right mind is going to stick their head out there if there's no crosswalk? You have to learn to think like a pedestrian, like a cyclist, and like a motorist, all three. So I say dare to make your decision and make it mean something. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. All right, are we ready to try a motion on this? Does anybody have something crafted? Would you like me to suggest something?
I think we have a little gray area here, personally. I'm a little unsure, to be real honest about it. The dilemma that I have with situations like this, the biggest dilemma I have is not an engineering aspect, which I fully understand. It's up to us to discuss and be subjective about. My biggest challenge is there are so many locations in Lawrence that are similar, and if we're going to fix them all, that's a big deal. And that's my dilemma. You know, I could see many opportunities to improve this street in different ways. I'm not sure what the best one is. I kind of have my own preference, but I just, that's my dilemma, you know, is just how do you address one kind of isolated, very meaningful to a lot of people area in Lawrence, and we have a bigger picture here. And I do struggle a little bit with the fact that Lawrence is a complaint-driven deal, you know, and it seems like it ought to be from the top down sometimes as opposed from the bottom up in terms of fixing things that need to be fixed and prioritizing them. But this is, you know, I'm just kind of rattling on here because I know it has to do with budget and money and priorities and all of that stuff. So personally, I just kind of wanted to put my feelings out there. You know, I'm in a gray area.
Well, I'm guessing we're not all agreeing on this one, but I think taking that larger view, I don't know if you know, the neighborhood would want this, but in that Bike Ped Issues Task Force, we spent a lot of time talking about the need to establish a highly visible network of bicycle boulevards.
Mm-hmm.
And those are essentially roads that are designed to prevent cut-through traffic, encourage cycling, allow for the local traffic, people that live there, and to make it a shared space for people that are walking, biking, and that also need to drive on that road. And this was right in there for good reason, because it leads people, it's a good transportation corridor for people of all user types. So I think the fact that, you know, the neighborhood is asking for it to be calmed is kind of compatible with that vision that this road could be part of a bike boulevard.
Now, for Bike Boulevard, is there a dedicated bike lane on that, or do you just keep the traffic volume going up? Full
No,
share?
you get traffic to slow down and you get traffic to avoid the road unless they actually live there. Then, of course, they have to get in there. But it's really creating a space where, you know, families with their kids are safe to get out on the street, ride their bike. I mean, the only other safer place we have for that is shared use paths that are off-road without, you know, many
Right.
driveways or street crossings.
Well, my only concern was if you had designated bike lane here and it's only 20 foot wide, you'd end up making it one way.
Mm-hmm.
Which
No.
would not be popular.
Bicycle boulevards haven't been, I mean, that'd be a great topic for us to take on. It's like, where should those bike boulevards be? The task force identified another one on 5th Street in order to get cyclists off 6th Street once they get closer to downtown.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as they get east of Wisconsin, basically was to move them over to 5th Street. And then the other boulevard that was discussed was 21st Street instead of 23rd Street.
Right.
And, you know, some roads just aren't built big enough to put a facility for each type of user. So getting those cyclists to move over a block makes it safer for them. And then the other bike boulevard was 17th Street, which basically threaded from KU all the way through Forest Avenue to the Lawrence Loop. So that was kind of the vision that the task force saw. And I think this is an opportunity to start that process. You know, I mean, the neighborhood, I mean, first, this doesn't approve that anything gets built today. It just approves that it's part of the list.
Mm-hmm.
And when the moment comes that it's funded and the community is consulted about what do you want to do, it'd be helpful to have a conversation about how this is part of something bigger than just your neighborhood. That's my perspective. And I think that it'd be important to establish 20 miles an hour as a speed limit on a bike boulevard, whether that enforcement is required or not. But if it's designed right and the speed limit's set accordingly, then that, to me, seems like what a bike boulevard would resemble.
I guess one more time, just to beat the horse. Are there any internal criteria that we use to set, so when we do reduce traffic, I know it's by ordinance, traffic speeds, is there any internal criteria that we use? Or is it just kind of a,
Well, the engineering recommendation is to sign streets for the 85th percentile speed. That's
Okay.
the speed with 85% of vehicles travel at or below, which studies have shown that that is the safest posted speed, is to to post it at that speed. So we have done reduced speed limits on streets that didn't, had higher speeds, so that's been done before. We could do that on this street as well.
But when you say safer, that's for vehicles safer. I mean, if I got a pedestrian walking on a 20-foot street and they're going 28 miles per hour, it's not very safe for the pedestrian.
I think the idea, Chris, is though that you don't have sidewalks. I mean, you
Right.
have separate sidewalks, and I think
Right.
we're dancing around this problem is there's not sidewalks there.
Exactly.
They shouldn't be walking in the street, and I understand that, but, you know, the bigger picture is, should they not have a sidewalk? Which, we're not being asked to put a sidewalk in there today, that's part of just a gap that exists, so.
I don't think that that street is designed for sidewalks. I think it's designed to be a shared use path for everyone. I mean, the right-of-way doesn't exist to do a sidewalk on it.
Well, I think that's when you can, I mean, you can generally build most anything, but, I mean, that would be something you could look at. I mean, you look at putting a closure in the middle and just allow bikes through, and then there isn't any more cut-through traffic except for bikes. I mean, there's things that exist, and I'm in support of traffic calming. I'm not in support of lowering the speed limit. So that's where I'm fall.
Would you guys like to consider these separately, speed limit and the traffic calming? Personally, I think they go together. But as I shared, it's kind of in my mind, this is the beginning of a longer process of establishing a bike boulevard.
I'll go ahead and move that traffic calming be installed at the location.
Second.
All right, we got a motion by Commissioner Ziegelmeier, seconded by Commissioner Hurt, to approve the traffic calming request. Is there any additional discussion on that?
Just point of clarification, does that not include
Not including the speed limit?
speed limit change?
All right, if there's no other discussion, all in favor of approving the traffic calming request without the speed limit reduction, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? Motion passes. Would anybody like to consider reducing the speed limit?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I make a motion that the speed limit be reduced to 20 miles per hour.
All right, Commissioner Payden made a motion to reduce the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. Is there anyone that would second that?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Severin?
Yes.
All right. Motion's been made by Commissioner Payden, seconded by Commissioner Severin to reduce the speed limit to 20 miles an hour on Forest Avenue between Barker and Leonard. Any discussion on it? Well, I'll make one point. The speed limit can be done immediately. Traffic calming might be years and years. And, you know, my own experience in my neighborhood, traffic calming was approved a year, maybe 2 years ago, and the speed limit sign was posted the next day, or the next week. It was pretty immediate, as a way just to affirm that it was 30 miles an hour. So there was no change in the speed limit. It was just trying to remind people that they shouldn't be driving beyond 30 miles an hour.
Did it have an effect?
You know, there was no data to say it did, but I think it did. At least made me feel like, as someone in the public said, they could point to something and say to someone zooming down the street, point them to the speed limit sign.
So Dave, if we approve that, you'll put up 2 speed limit signs, one in each direction. What, third of the way down the block or so? Or
Yeah, at the end of the block.
at the end of the block?
Yeah, not right. not right at the end, but we'll have to look for the appropriate place to put it. It just depends on driveways and where people are parking and other obstacles, but yeah, on either end.
And I just see this as providing more immediate relief. And when the traffic calming is installed, ideally, the speed limit would, in fact, be more. Yeah, it would be, in some ways, right now, the speed limit is set too high. If we use the 85th percentile as the rule, which they've explained, the speed limit should only be 28. So, and seriously, if you've been on that road, it's hard to believe that anyone would think it's safe to drive 30 miles an hour. If you took the speed limit and established that this is what I should drive, I mean, it would be a bit insane to drive 30 miles an hour.
I believe this is kind of a textbook case of looking at the traffic calming policy to kind of expand. Because this isn't a real collector street. This is a little, driveway.
It's
20 foot wide and
it's
the
an old
houses
country
are set
road,
back,
is
the
what it
houses are
feels
set
like.
back 10 feet,
All right, well, there's a motion on the table made by Commissioner Payton, seconded by Commissioner Severin to reduce the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. Is there any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of reducing the speed limit to 20 miles an hour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Commissioner Hand? All right. Are there any abstentions?
I abstain.
And Commissioner Hurt abstained. Motion passes. All right, thank you for coming tonight.
And we look forward to being a bicycle boulevard.
That's great to hear.
We already are now, we might as well make it official.
Well, I honestly, I think you are. I mean, in a lot of ways, people treat it like it is. This has to go before the city commission, of course, for their approval with our recommendation. So, all right, thank you. This brings us to item number 4 on the agenda, the traffic calming request on Lincoln Street between 3rd and 7th Street.
That's a bluebird. Was that what you said? I meant ladybird. I've never eaten there. Yep.
Hello, I'd like to introduce one of our summer interns who will be presenting the next thing, Abigail Bradshaw, who's been involved with the Lincoln Street traffic calming request.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Abby, and I'm a Public Works intern. So as we shortly mentioned before, in 2009, Lincoln Street residents requested a reduction in the speed limit from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour due to resident concerns for safety and due to a lot of speeding that was happening on the street. And this was implemented. And then in 2011, the Lincoln Street residents requested that stop signs be installed, and 4-way stop signs were then installed at the intersections of 3rd and Lincoln and 5th and Lincoln. So then in May 2017, we received a request from a resident for traffic calming measures on Lincoln between 3rd and 7th. The residents felt that the speed limit reductions and the stop signs were not doing enough to calm the traffic and the speeding, and felt that people were not honoring those speed limits. The Lincoln Street is classified as a local street and has a posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour. It is a safe route to school for Woodlawn Elementary, but it is not a bus route or on the bike plan. There is no sidewalk on Lincoln from 3rd Street to 4th Street, but there is sidewalk on the south side from 4th to 7th. The street is around 18 feet wide for most of it, and it has V-ditch drainage, so no curb and gutter. The 85th percentile speeds and the 24-hour traffic counts were obtained from 3rd Street to 7th Street in July 2017, and the average 85th percentile speed was 34 miles per hour, and the average 24-hour two-way count was 356 vehicles. The City of Lawrence has this traffic calming policy that we've mentioned with the 4 criteria, And because the average 85th percentile speed on the street was 9 miles per hour above above the speed limit of 25 miles per hour, then that would meet criteria A, which states that the 85th percentile speed is 5 miles per hour or more above the posted speed limit. So therefore, the staff recommends that the Transportation Commission approve these requests to install traffic calming measures on Lincoln Street between 3rd and 7th.
Thank you.
Any questions?
What questions do we have?
There's no data on the volume, though? It was just speed limit?
Yeah, the volume data is listed over here on this table.
Okay.
And the volume traffic totals were not meeting the criteria for the reduction, but like I said, the speed criteria was meeting those criteria.
What else do we need to know about this one? I guess you're done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abby. All right, what questions does the public have about this item? Or comments?
I have comments.
Yep.
Good evening. My name is Tyra Kalman Crouch, and I live at 408 Lincoln Street, and I've lived there for 11 years. I want to thank you for taking my comments tonight and thank the city and the project engineers regarding the traffic calming. I initially contacted the city and the police department 2 years ago regarding speeding. I noticed a rash of speeders along our street, and I might note that there are 15 children ranging in age from in utero to 17 between 3rd Street and 5th, 15. Several years ago, our mailbox was run over by a speeder, and I'm concerned for the safety of our children and our community. Lincoln is a highly traveled street. We have a neighborhood towing service. We also have a landscape service who at times barrel down the street, and that adds to our concern. The Lawrence Police Department has been very supportive and responsive to our concerns. One of the officers actually lives in our neighborhood. He lives on Lyon, and he frequently patrols the neighborhood, and he set a speed trap at the church 2 houses east of my home, and he had a pretty successful day. He was able to sort of validate my concerns. So I would urge you to consider Zach Baker's recommendations and ensure that our neighbors and our children, some of which who are here tonight, remain safe and sound and install some type of traffic calming device. I understand that the speed bumps take a while, so we would like to have stop signs, more stop signs if possible, put in immediately in lieu of the speed bumps that hopefully will come later. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak about this?
Hi, I'm Arthur Dodge. I live across the street from Tyra. These are all our kids, very hungry kids. Is a stop sign part of traffic calming?
It wasn't the request tonight, so I think that would have to be brought back for staff to consider.
Well, I'd like to follow up with, unlike the Forest Avenue Street, congratulations, by the way. As you know, the block between 3rd and 5th is the long blocks. So I think the stop signs were put in at 3rd and 5th at least a couple of years ago or something. But people between those streets, between those stop signs, fly through there. I'm a writer. I spend a lot of time on my porch, day and night. It's incredible that nobody's been injured or killed on that stretch yet. there's a lot of hungry guys going to the Bird for some chicken fried steak, which is part of it, I think. But I would urge you to put not only stop signs at 4th and Lincoln going both ways, and if you, I don't know if you have it on the map, but that's kind of a Z. 4th Street does a little jump there. So 4th comes here, it does about a 30-foot jump, and jumps again on our corner. So not only do people fly down that street, but oftentimes traveling east, they will turn on our corner. We've had multiple people in our ditch. It's just a matter of time before, with 16 kids, is that what it is? It's a matter of time before somebody's seriously hurt. And as well as, much like 4th Street, North Lawrence is trees, trees, trees. So not only one of the 25 mile per hour speed limit signs you can't even see. So that does zero good when it's behind a tree, which, you know. So I would urge you to put speed humps. I don't know when we started calling them humps instead of bumps. It makes me a little uncomfortable. But between each block, 3rd to 4th, 4th to 5th, 5th to 6th, 6th to 7th. Because the speeds down, especially from 3rd to 5th, are ridiculous. My neighbors and I would be happy to get 20 or 30 bags of cement and take care of it, but we'd like to do it the official way, because it's a matter of time before somebody's hurt or killed, without question.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak tonight about this issue?
Hi, my name is Jason Stevens. I live on Lincoln Street, 5th and Lincoln. And probably won't be very popular, I guess, but I mean, I noticed a huge difference when the speed limit was decreased and the stop signs were installed. I noticed traffic decreasing a lot. And there are a few bad apples. There's a couple motorcycles that blaze through there and some large trucks. I'm not there all day, but I mean, it's the quietest street I've ever lived on. I think it's a very quiet street. But I just have some questions about when the study was done, and if it was done on averages, or if you had like the cables down to truly measure. I think this street should definitely get an accurate, full 24-hour count, not an average of every car that goes through and the real speed limit, so that nothing is average, so that we really know what we're dealing with.
Dave, can you speak about that, or Abby? Or Zach?
Placed in between each mid-block. To get accurate speeds, mid-block was typically when they reach peak speeds between, 3rd and 4th, 5th and 6th. So the speed data that we have should be an accurate representation between each block specifically, and 24-hour counts were taken between each block as well.
When was this done?
In July.
Okay, like over 4th of July was the only time I was gone. I've never seen.
So they put these plates, so, like you probably familiar with the tube counters. We actually use plates that go on top of the asphalt. They're a little less easy to see, but they take counts in both directions. So we have speeds from eastbound traffic and speeds from westbound traffic and counts in both directions. It would not have been on July 4th week. I can promise you that.
And they're done on Tuesdays and Wednesdays?
We do them Tuesday through Thursday just to kind of get a general representation of what a weekday would be, work weekday.
So these are, so nothing was averaged. Those are real numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wow, I don't remember the plates at all, but whatever traffic calming is installed, I just seriously want to question speed humps. They're noisy. I mean, I noticed also, in addition to the road getting calm when the speed limit was reduced and the stop signs went up, I also noticed more noise. And it's okay, I mean, it's whatever, but I mean, speed humps are going to do that even more. I mean, all the cars are going to stop, cause more noise, speed up again. They delay emergency responders. They've reportedly delay a full ambulance by 10 seconds for every hump. And I don't know what other options there are, but I mean, I'd rather see digital warning signs, or I don't know if speed humps aren't decided, how would they decide where they go?
So the speed humps are not the only option. They usually consult with the neighborhood to discuss what could be done, and then that proposed design is brought back to us. Kind of similar earlier discussion. The only thing that happens tonight is we decide if this gets on a list that has 20 projects already on it, and then the city commission also has to provide funding, or those projects just sit on a list.
Okay.
So it's a multi-step process. The design of the traffic calming happens only after the funding is allocated for it.
Okay.
And it's done in consultation with the neighborhood, so.
Well, in fact, so many, 70% of the land property owners have to approve it.
Yeah, so it's really, tonight,
70%
we're
of
just
location.
making the decision whether we think it's warranted to have something to calm the traffic.
Okay.
And then they have other tools in their box. They're like,
I just think, to Steve's point earlier, if Lincoln Street needs speed humps, then every street in Lawrence needs speed humps, as would be my opinion on that. I just think that speed humps are going to divert traffic to Lyon, which is a higher speed limit.
that's often actually the goal.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why people will calm a street, to push people back to the more appropriate street, if
Yeah.
there's a more appropriate street.
All the traffic? Just want all
Perhaps.
the traffic to go to
Yeah,
Lyon.
perhaps.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments from the public?
Evening.
Good evening.
My name is Holly Hangauer, and I've lived, I actually lived at 3rd and Lincoln for 6 years, and then moved across the street because I love the neighborhood so much. So we've lived there for 8 years. And I am home during the day and walk my young children on the street all the time until I get to the part of Lincoln Street that has the sidewalk. And I live on the corner of 3rd and Lincoln, the very corner, so I see, the speed is not only an issue that I've seen for many, many years, but I know, buddy. Okay, go ask Daddy to help you. And there are also many people that run that four-way stop at 3rd and Lincoln. I think it's just an area that gets a little bit overlooked, or people just disregard laws and rules there. And it's definitely a neighborhood that's turning over, where there are a lot of families. And I do think that some precautions are very important for young children, and they walk to school, and that's all I want to say. So thank you very much for listening to us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I thought I saw someone else trying to get up. Yep.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I live on 4th and Lincoln Street as well. I live on the block that most of these people live on as well. But my house is actually where the sidewalk stops going, and then the sidewalk doesn't continue on till North 2nd Street, I believe. But it is a school route. We have lots of kids that live on that street, and 34 miles an hour without sidewalk is pretty fast for a neighborhood street that kids are on, and they're going to be on walking to school starting next week, 5 days a week. So I do think that I'm not sure what the options are. I know speed humps, I wouldn't want more noise in our neighborhood as well, but when we're talking about safety, I feel like one clearly outweighs the other when it comes to just the safety of the neighborhood. I also feel like I feel like with the speed hump, it does deter people from blowing down those streets because people like to skip the train. We do have a lot of people trying to get to the other side on the east, just cruising way too fast. I'm also home, so I see this daily, and we just would appreciate anything that you are willing to consider to lower that rate for our kids. So I think that's it. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else like to talk?
Hi, my name is Meg Hereford. I live at 403 Lincoln, and I'll just briefly echo what my neighbors are saying. That it feels very dangerous to have tow trucks going 45 miles an hour down the street where kids are playing, and the neighborhood is not getting older; it's going the other way. So, as we say, a family-friendly neighborhood in North Lawrence, it would make sense to me that we want people to drive slowly down our block. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Bring it. Okay.
Basically, I also live on the street. I'm not here because I have a toddler who was having a meltdown before coming here. My name's Kylie Grader. And obviously, we all get along really well. And we're always going back and forth in between our homes. I live on the section between 3rd and 4th, so we don't have a sidewalk. We're very close with the hang hours, so I'm traveling, walking with a child that's 2 as well to hang out with their children that are also very young. And it is scary going down those sidewalk-less streets. And we all want to hang out safely. And we do keep really good eyes on our kids, but it is scary when a child might get excited about something or have a meltdown and run another way. So that's my concern with this flow of traffic through our neighborhood. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Let's bring it back to the commission. What else do we need to learn about this before we can decide?
David, do you have the records on what the 85 percentile speed was when it was the count was done at 30 miles an hour?
Can you see that okay?
Not quite.
Not well.
Okay. No, this is the most recent traffic count.
No, my question was
We have
before.
that data
Oh, okay.
with us now, but from past counts, we can obtain that. We looked at it. It's that's why offhand, I can't think of what the average speed was then, but they did ultimately reduce the speed to 25.
Yeah, no, I know.
Any recollection if the speed limit change caused any change in volume or speed of traffic?
No, it's pretty much stayed consistent with what we have now. 2009, they made the request to lower the speed limits. That wasn't getting it, so 2 years later, 2011, they requested stop signs at 3rd and 5th, implemented those, nothing changed, and then here we are, present day, so it's...
So if I got it right,
We've kind of thrown a couple
speed
things at
limits
it, and it's
first,
not really...
stop signs
helped
second,
yet. Mhm.
and now we're at traffic calming.
Now we're at traffic calming.
Okay.
I may be wrong, but if I remember correctly, when we did the stop signs, the 85 percentile was 35, 36. So lowering it 5 miles, only lowered the 85%, 2 miles.
At most.
At
most.
At most.
Well, I'll give you an opinion here. I think, I appreciate the comment. I do think personally that Lincoln Street is unique from my perspective. However tempting it is to turn on Locust to go to the Tropicana, it's kind of hard not to do that. But oftentimes, if I'm headed to 32, I think I'm like a lot of people. The path of least resistance is what I'm attracted to most of the time. And rather than to negotiate North 2nd Street to get to 32, and I don't go more than 25 miles per hour, but I do turn on Lincoln and go up to 7th Street, and then I go north on 7th Street. And honestly, I don't do that every time I'm headed in that direction, but I do it often enough. And I do think that you're probably going to see a lot of cut-through traffic on Lincoln with that mentality. And I think there's also going to be commuters that do the same thing. And commuters are going to be in a hurry. I may not be, but I think the commuters will be trying to get to 32 to, you know, skip the turnpike fee to get to Kansas City. I'm on Lincoln Street enough. I have a friend that lives right at 5th and Lincoln, and I think it's subjectively, without even looking at the data, it feels like the traffic is pretty fast there. And I'm not there that much, but when I am, it seems unique to me in that regard, much different than Lion Street or Lake or that are smaller streets. Lincoln is the natural street to cut through if you want to get over or go to the Flamingo or whatever, you know. So I do think there's an issue there.
My comment is not, I don't know if it's neither here nor there, but it just strikes me, you know, when I was growing up, I could play on the streets and people actually said, hey, there's kids here, we should slow down, and we didn't need traffic calming devices, and now we've just come to an age where we have to force people to slow down when there's kids around, and I just, you know, that's just a comment. I just think that's kind of a sad change in society in general, but yeah.
Is there anything else we want to know before we make a decision? Okay. Would someone like to present a motion?
Motion to accept staff recommendation.
I second it.
All right, motion's made by Commissioner Hurt, seconded by Commissioner May to accept the staff recommendation, to approve the staff recommendation to put traffic calming on Lincoln Street from 3rd Street to 7th Street. Is there any other discussion? Any other comment from the public before we vote? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, motion passes. That takes us to item number 5, school area traffic control. A request for a marked crosswalk at the intersection of Harvard Road and Crestline Drive.
Aaron Roberts is going to present the next item. He's an intern with the Public Works Department.
Good evening, Commissioners. Again, my name is Aaron Roberts. I'm an intern with the Public Works Department this summer. In May of 2017, the Traffic Safety Commission received a request for a marked crosswalk at the intersection of Crestline Drive and Harvard Road. Both Crestline Drive and Harvard Road are classified as collector streets, paved approximately 26 feet wide with speed limits of 30 miles per hour. Both Crestline Drive and Harvard Road are identified as safe routes to school, and both are identified as bike routes, and the countywide on the countywide bikeway study. The intersection is located on the southeast corner of West Middle School and includes a four-way stop. Lawrence's school crossing control policy states, marked crosswalks shall be limited to one per street per school when practical, and unprotected crosswalks, which are intersections that do not include stop signs, traffic signals, or an adult crossing guard, may be marked if required by a school route plan, or if a school route plan does not exist, it is not practical for children to use a protected crosswalk. The Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices states, at locations controlled by traffic control signals or on approaches controlled by stop or yield signs, crosswalk lines should be installed where engineering judgment indicates they are needed to protect pedestrians to the proper crossing paths. The proposed crosswalk at Crestline Drive and Harvard Road is at a controlled intersection with a four-way stop. Pedestrians attempting to cross Crestline Drive currently use the north side of the intersection, since Harvard Road only has sidewalk along its north side. The addition of crosswalk pavement markings at this location would not help direct pedestrians to the proper crossing path. Also, a marked crosswalk with a school crossing sign currently exists at the intersection of Crestline Drive and Yale Road, 500 feet to the north of the intersection of Crestline Drive and Harvard Road. It is recommended that the Transportation Committee deny the request for a marked crosswalk at the intersection of Crestline Drive and Harvard Road. Any questions?
What questions do we have on this one?
Was the school district contacted at all for comment from them?
No.
I will say I've been a bit of the liaison for that. I took the initial request from the resident that came to the principal who passed it to me, and I passed it along.
Do they have a stance?
The school district? Well, you know, I think in our opinion, the issue here is, well, it is a four-way stop there, but it's a matter of directing kids safely, and we do have a crosswalk, like you said, to the north, and that's where kids tend to enter more, and that street where that is at the front of the building tends to be where most of the vehicular drop-off is.
Right.
So you're kind of steering kids away from the traffic coming through,
Right.
so that they'll enter the building from the back.
So you want them to use that one on Yale rather than this one?
Yeah, that's the preferred path.
Is it possible to pull up the safe routes map?
Yes. There are two. There's one for West Middle School and one for Sunset Hill Elementary. For West Middle, it is located, you can see where the cursor is, right there. And for Sunset Hill, it's located right here.
Not sure if we can get any closer. I just wanted to see from the map how a student would know that they should travel north on Crestline before crossing.
Middle schools do not qualify under current city policy for crossing guards, only elementaries do. So any crossing guard that would be in the area would be for Sunset Hill, technically not for West, so there wouldn't be one there at that area, no. There is one, I think, where you see the yellow sign above Sunset Hill, I think there is one up there. There is a crossing guard, but that's to the north of Sunset Hill.
Are you suggesting that maybe this map ought to be revised then to show going north along Harvard, or north along Crestline to Yale? I'm looking at the West Middle School one. Yeah, so that shows crossing Crestline rather than going north along.
I mean, the way the map looks now, it appears to me we're trying to direct students to cross right there.
Correct. Correct, but I'm asking, should the map be revised based on his comments of how the school district wants students to come in?
So, I feel like I should know this, but do we have any data on, like, you know, we have things that we do to try and direct students to go a certain way, but do we have any data on actual behavior? Like, how students actually behave? Like, what makes, it just seems like I remember seeing something on trying to design a road so that people do what you want them to do, but because of how it's structured, they do what makes the most sense. And I'm just wondering, like, do we have any information on how the students, where they actually feel most comfortable crossing?
I would say in the closest situation I could come up with was when we were dealing with the neighborhood 27th Street to South Middle School, when we had only sidewalk on the south side, I believe, and the city put sidewalk in on the north side. And the idea was to get kids up to a corner crossing guard, then use the tunnel. But kids were, middle school kids especially, were darting across the street wherever they were. You know, you see your friend over there, I'm not going to walk parallel to my friend, I'm going to get to my friend. Now this is a little more controlled in that it's it's right next to the property, and there is a four-way stop, so it's not, and those are both pretty busy roads in the morning. But so I don't know if we can compare that information so as much. I mean, our principals do tend to try, you know, through, you know, every year at the beginning of the year especially, and if that refreshers is needed, they send out to all the families, you know, here's the drop-off plan, here's the student entry plan, where students should come in, where they should walk. But again, it's just only goes as far as they're willing to listen. And I can understand a student coming up the street, and especially if I'm a sixth grader and my lockers are right there at the front of the building, I don't want to walk all the way to the back of the building, come in and go all the way back up to the front of the building. So I can understand why they would want to do that. And there is still sidewalk, it's just a matter of, and as I talked to that patron, her concern just was that even though there is a four-way stop, people aren't necessarily looking for pedestrians there. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they were hoping to have a crosswalk to kind of just as a reminder, but traffic has to stop, and they're going from a sidewalk to a sidewalk, so it's still a legal crossing, just not marked.
Is there any other signage at that intersection, like pedestrian arrows, or they just stop signs and that's it?
Stop signs.
Just
They
stop
just stop
signs?
signs.
There's no other signage? Okay.
Do we have a copy of the request?
No, I didn't see that either.
Yeah, it was an email. It came early in the year, the school year last year, middle of the year last year, school year.
The memo says it was received in May. Is that when it was?
Yeah, I think.
It says it was received by the Traffic Safety Commission in May 2017.
Okay.
Was that?
The original
Just
email, I
a-
think, when I first contacted her, it came over earlier than that, but that by the time it got through the whole system,
Okay.
it got to them.
Any other questions for Aaron? Anything else we need to know before we let the public speak? Okay, thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public that'd like to address this item? Okay, back to us for discussion.
Right, and then a four-way stop. I mean, it does seem if you're going to put another crosswalk marking, that would be the most logical place to do it at that intersection, I guess, just because you can't only take the other side. I mean, you have kids. I assume that the rest of that neighborhood to the east is served by Sunset and West, right? Or is it? Is it served by Hillcrest?
To the east.
Yeah, to the east.
Well, for West Middle School, you have
That's
kids
right,
coming
right,
from
from
across,
west.
from the other side
Right,
of Iowa, yes.
absolutely, okay.
We did do a boundary change last year, or a couple years ago, that took a bunch of kids further north to Central, but they would be, most of those students are bus qualified, and a lot of the kids onto the farther east of that area are also within that 2.5 mile range to be bused. So I can't give you exact numbers, but it's a pretty small population of the middle school that would be coming from that direction right there. The bulk of the population is going to be coming from the north and from the west.
So personally, for me, I'd like to see people move down south and cross there because it's a controlled stop. I mean, there's an intersection with stop signs. That seems like the better place to direct kids to cross than at Yale, where there's nothing controlling it.
The only thing against would be you're kind of in that sag right there, that four-way stop.
Yeah, there is a hill.
So people are coming down. In fact, we had that discussion just a couple months ago, people coming down Harvard.
And not stopping?
There, yeah.
So I guess what you're saying is they're directing people to go to Yale, kids to go to Yale. So if you live at the corner of, let's say Westdale and whatever that is, Centennial, you're directing kids to go all the way up to Yale and then cross to go into the school? Is that correct?
Well, that's not what I see on the map. I mean, that's why I asked the question. I mean, it looks to me like you're being directed to cross right there.
I guess one thing to
maybe not
confirm is we're marking the crosswalk for, the purpose of the crosswalk marking is basically for the school policy.
Well,
is that what we're trying to do with, when we mark a crosswalk and say, hey, kids, go this way?
I think so. I mean, I think the
And then we're
Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices says it's engineering judgment
and then
to put in this marked crosswalk where there's already a stop sign.
And then for that, it's basically this policy for elementary school kids.
That's crossing guards.
Okay, that's
That's a physical person, not a crosswalk.
So the Safe Routes to School map, sorry, mine has a little letter there, it didn't, shows kids on Harvard crossing right there. Yeah.
And it seems to me like we got to either follow the route plan or change the route plan. And it would be, it would conform with this to say, let's put in the marked crossing.
Yes.
Where the route is established to lead more kids to take that crossing rather than the one up at Yale.
I mean, would it? Would the kids follow that one way or the other? They're going to cross wherever they want to cross, whether you have markings or not.
That's
But logically
perhaps
speaking,
true.
like, if you're thinking about behavior, you can't really direct them to go to Yale. Because if you live, I just think it probably, I went to West, you'd think I could remember what we did, but I came from the other way. It just seems like kids are gonna cross straight right there and go in the front door if that's the side of the building they're on. But I don't know, maybe it does depend on things like where their friends walk into the school and stuff like that, so.
Yeah, well, that's the other part of it, just, the south, or excuse me, the north side of the building is where the kids tend to congregate. There's a large common area out there. They don't open the doors until a certain time, so if they get there early, it's not to say kids don't hang out on the front steps or whatever either, but the bulk of the students are back there in that little courtyard area until it's time for it to come out. Kids tend to exit out that way. That's where the gymnasium is, so after school, if there's a game, that's where they go in, or the dances. My son went to West as well. Whenever they get out on early release, they're jetting down the road to either Wayne and Larry's or to Munchers, so they still stay up further up on 9th Street, quite honestly. So
I guess one comment I would make is that there appears to be a crosswalk on the west side of the street heading north and south. And so, in my mind, that would mean we're wanting people to be on the sidewalk to the west. But we're not wanting them to cross to that until later. And so I guess it doesn't make sense to me why we wouldn't put a crosswalk in there if there's already a crosswalk that's encouraging people to walk on that sidewalk that they're trying to cross at this intersection. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all, but and maybe this is an outdated image because I'm just looking at Google Maps. So
I don't have any history on why that crosswalk was installed at that location. We do have the aerials going back. In 1995, there was a crosswalk on all four legs of the intersection. In 1996, the first edition of the school zone policy came out, and there was an emphasis on elementary schools through that, and we're working to add middle schools to it in the future. But as best as I can tell, that the elementary school to the north is the reason why that existing crosswalk was chosen to be maintained and the other ones were not.
Is this a textured material or just a paint applied to the surface?
It would be somewhat textured.
It would be textured?
We wouldn't use paint for
Okay.
this application.
Okay.
We do use paint in some areas because we do mark them every year. I don't know what material we use for the one on the west. I think recently mill and overlaid some of these streets over there. So when we do that, we try to put down the permanent tape,
Right.
which lasts longer. But some of our normal school crosswalks that we mark, we just mark them every year with paint and just plan on painting them every year so they have good presence at the beginning of every school year.
Any other discussion, or are we ready to make a decision? Well, I think I'm not sure I'm fully grasping where we're going, but it sounds like we're disagreeing with the staff recommendation. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the request for the marked crosswalk intersection of Harvard Road and Crestline Drive.
I second.
Well, I'm just entertaining.
Oh, you're entertaining the motion, sorry. Well, then I make a motion that we.
All right. Who seconded? Sharts? Okay. The motion is to approve the request for marked crosswalk at the intersection of Harvard Road and Crestline Drive. The motion was made by Commissioner Payden and seconded by Commissioner Sharts. Is there any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions?
I'll abstain.
Commissioner May will abstain. The motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item number 6, Highway Safety Improvement Program at 13th and Massachusetts Street.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Nick Voss from the Public Works Department. KDOT administers a federal aid highway safety improvement program with funding made available to local communities for construction of safety improvements on highways or local streets. The program is competitive and award decisions are based on a life cycle cost-benefit analysis of the proposed improvement measures. This is a 90-10 sharing program to pay for the construction cost of safety improvements. In July of 2016, city staff applied for a mill and overlay project, including new lane configurations with bike amenities and a center left turn lane for Massachusetts from 11th to 14th Street. City staff submitted the application with crash data for 13th and Massachusetts. In the 3 previous years, 11 crashes were reported, with 3 involving bicycles or pedestrians. KDOT reviewed the data and allocated $100,000 for this project. The project is currently included in the 2018 budget with $50,000 in city funds for a total of $150,000. Massachusetts Street has been identified as a bike route and connects to a bike route on 14th Street that goes to the University of Kansas, and a bike route on 13th Street that goes to the Haskell Rail to Trails. A bike lane option for this section of roadway would convert the existing roadway to include a travel lane in each direction with a two-way left turn lane from South Park to 15th Street. This option would remove conditional parking along the east side of the road. As this project is further studied, affected property owners and residents will be invited to provide input. A parking option for this section of roadway would convert the existing roadway to include a travel lane in each direction with a two-way left turn lane from South Park to 15th Street. The reduction from 3 lanes to 4 lanes would allow for unrestricted parking or bus stops to be allowed on both sides of the street. The current scope of the Highway Safety Improvement Program includes bike lanes for this project, and if bicycle amenities are not provided, then KDOT may not be able to provide money for the project. The Federal Highway Administration states the roadways with daily traffic of 20,000 vehicles per day and under make good candidates for 3-lane configuration roadways. Mass Street currently has 14,200 vehicles per day, and on 9th Street from Emory to Illinois, which was recently reconfigured from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, there are 16,700 vehicles per day. The city staff at this time is recommending to accept the Highway Safety Improvement Program money for lane reconfiguration and a mill and overlay project on Mass Street from 11th to 14th, with construction contingent on the acceptance of the final design. In addition, we are bringing this to the Transportation Commission to receive input and direction as appropriate. I'll take any questions that you guys have.
Thanks. What questions do we have? I have just a comment on the memo. Nick, you've identified that this was not a safe route to school.
This is on a safe route for Liberty Memorial
Okay.
Central Middle School.
Thanks.
I checked the elementary schools, so I apologize for that.
Okay. Anything else we need to know from Nick? Nick, at this point, the actual design of the roadway, whether it's on your diagram with the existing configuration, the other option with the buffered bike lane, and then the third option with the on-street parking, do you need us to make a decision about that tonight?
I don't need any decisions from the group tonight. If you wanted staff to look into something more, each segment along the roadway could also have a different configuration. We may not need a center left turn lane in front of South and North Park, for example. We just wanted to get, if you guys had any further direction or wanted anything for the next time that we bring it to this group.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add that at this point where we're at, we applied for some money for KDOT for this intersection. We would like to be able to formally accept it. We can still, in the future, turn it back if we decide not to do anything. But what I would, the reason why we put this on here tonight is just to see if we should look at a broader scope project than just the intersection of 13th and Mass. I know this Massachusetts Street's been one of those streets that has been discussed as having a bike route or a bike facility on Mass Street. With this opportunity, we would be able to do a mill and overlay and restriping, which would be a lower cost project to do some on-street bike lanes. If we were able to remove parking, that needs to go through a process with the neighbors and to remove the on-street parking that does exist on the nights and weekends, or on Sundays, I guess. To do a larger project that would be a shared use path, side path, or widen the street to still have parking and then have bike lanes, that would be a much more expensive project. We would not be able to do that with this highway safety money. So I think this is an opportunity to see if we would be able to get on-street bike facilities and also improve safety at this intersection. And when we took an initial look at it, when you look at 14th Street, where you have the traffic signal and you're going south on Mass Street, it already reduces to one lane and then it winds back out. So, in this segment here between downtown at 11th and around 14th, 15th Street, where we have some, we have downtown one lane each direction, and then it widens out, and then we have that intersection there with a signal. This could be an opportunity to see how it works. This lane configuration, by restriping it, it could always be changed in the future. But also understand that going back to the Ped Bike Task Force and discussions with neighbors, there are some folks that are interested in Massachusetts Street having a bike facility all the way down to 23rd Street. So I think that's a bigger project than this would be, and outside the scope of the safety money, but this could be an opportunity to add the on-street bike lanes, or to preserve the parking and to get a center turn lane and to have one lane each direction. So,
what are the project limits now?
But the project limits actually haven't been defined. When we applied for the funds, it was particularly geared towards the intersection of 13th in Mass, and so to accomplish that center turn lane for that intersection, it would extend 14 at a minimum. I would say 14th Street to South Park.
I live at 15th in Vermont, so I drive along this a lot, and what you're saying, where it goes from 4 to 3 and then kind of back to 4, is very confusing for a lot of drivers. I'll be driving and I get people cutting in front of me a lot because they don't know what's happening. And then the other thing I was going to say is I really often don't see that many cars parked in the 1300 block of Mass, so I don't know that taking away that parking is going to be a big deal for most people there. But and then as a cyclist, I'm all for bike lanes there. I like it.
I would agree with Catherine totally. I think it's...
Before we get into discussion, I just want to clarify, we're still doing questions of the staff. Is there,
okay.
Are there any other questions we want, or can we let Nick sit down? Okay.
I guess, how do you see, I think I think it's often been discussed that changing Mass from downtown to 23rd Street to allow for all forms of transportation more comfortably. I think it's pretty important. And I think at the time it was like, and I think this is very true, it's like the least for the most. Mass Street would be such a huge, I think could really alter how people are able to use biking and walking in town to get where they're going. And Mass Street is probably probably is the biggest destination besides KU to do that. And so I guess my major question would be how would that affect that potential sort of further down the road project? Like, it just seems like it could very much, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or how this might be, but seems like it could very much direct what ends up happening later. And that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. But I don't know, like how would that affect all that? How would that, does that make sense?
Are you asking about a larger project to
Yeah,
kind of redo the streetscape?
Well, so are you saying we could do this this year, or are you saying we can hold off and wait till the larger project? I guess that's the best thing to start with.
Well, I mean, I think we have an opportunity with this project to do, add some bike facilities relatively soon. We don't have any plans to redo Mass Street.
Right.
It's not in bad condition as far as the pavement goes. We do maintenance every so often, mill and overlays. It's not in our 5-year CIP to redo Mass Street. And, I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon.
So I guess my question really is, will it matter when it is changed 10 years down the road or whatever? How will this affect it, or could it affect it in a way that makes it harder to do what we would want to have happen?
I don't know how to answer that, but I think, if you were able to add bike facilities like this and you start seeing people use it more and more often in the future, that may help.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
So I think, sometimes you just got to take incremental steps to get to the ultimate goal, and this could be an opportunity to do that for a section. It's just, it gets very expensive to do a more larger project to reconstruct the street, and then you get into widening the street and curb and gutter and storm sewer and all those other things. This is just milling and overlaying the asphalt pavement and restriping. And we feel like this could be an opportunity as well to do some sort of buffered bike lane, that we could squeeze the lanes down to what we would feel is, I guess, a minimal width to feel comfortable still to maintain traffic lane widths, and get a buffered bike lane at about 7 feet. So,
What are the traffic lane widths again? Sorry, they're...
right now, I think the street is 46 feet from face of curb to face of curb.
46 feet?
So there are approximately 12-foot lanes,
Okay.
four 11.5-foot lanes right now.
Okay.
Another thing is, say you stripe it with bike lanes, in the interim time before the next decision to maybe expand that project, we'll have a couple years of data on there with, was there increased accidents, or was there decreased, or did it not change and you've gained a bike facility as well. Similar to the road diet we did on 9th Street. With each year we have more data, then it'll be easier to sell or not sell in the future, so right now is just kind of a cheap opportunity to kind of see.
I have a question kind of along the lines of Aaron's question. The timing of this would this be done in next year? Is that when
we have it in the budget to do next year.
Okay.
We submitted the application and set a placeholder for it in 2018. After getting back with KDOT on the approving the funds, we would work on a schedule with them, project schedule and timing. It could potentially be done by the end of next year. We would need to get going here by the end of this year on design to do it next year, and work through the KDOT project schedule process, which can be a year. But I think if we do approve the funds, they've allocated them for 2018, 2019, so there's some flexibility. It just depends on how long it takes for us to put together plans. And
any other questions? All right, thanks, Nick. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this item?
Massachusetts Street is one of the major streets introducing people to our community, and we need to keep that in mind. I'm really excited about the idea of a bike lane. I think that's just great. I cringe at the thought of a shared use path. I don't think it's appropriate on that street, and as a pedestrian, I am not comfortable sharing with a bicycle on a city sidewalk. There are some areas, you know, like Clinton Parkway and whatnot, that's just fine. I won't go out there anyway. But when you walk on Massachusetts Street, you're not walking for recreation. You're walking for destination. And to have moving hardware that you have to share with is very uncomfortable. Even if there are all these courtesies about jingling the bell and whatnot, it always startles me. I'm looking at this intersection, and there was a lot of discussion about moving traffic. Fine. There is no discussion about pedestrians. If you look at that intersection, you did have a hit and run. It was a pedestrian. I think there were 3 accidents, three crashes, 3 pedestrian crashes at that intersection. And there are major hazards. First off, if we put in the bike lanes, the pedestrian has to negotiate the auto traffic and the bikes. And the bikes may or may not be going at a slow speed. Then you look at the actual layout. Rounded corners are very hazardous for pedestrians because cars always want to creep around them. Turn lanes, it doesn't matter if it's a right turn or a left turn, very hazardous for pedestrians. So if you put in 2 left turn lanes and then you have bicycles, that's a lot for a pedestrian to negotiate, and they have no defense. In a way, they should have a very high priority, because if they are in a crash, they're not going to make it. If a car's in a crash, they can make it at those speeds. So I don't really have any solutions. I'm excited about the bike lanes, but I think there needs to be a whole lot more discussion on pedestrian safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Marilyn Hull, 1621 Oxford Road. I would just encourage you to consider the buffered bike lane idea, if not a protected bike lane idea. One thing we have learned over time is that about 2/3 of cyclists don't feel comfortable in an unprotected bike lane. So you're really limiting the additional usage if all you put in is a stripe, essentially. If you can do a little bit more and use, and I don't know exactly what the paint configuration is called, but you separate the bike lane from the lanes of traffic by 1 foot or 2 foot of striped pavement, that provides an additional level of safety. Even better than that would be to install bollards or some other sort of structure that would create a visual and actual barrier between bicycles and cars. I think that's the way that, in terms of thinking of the future, I think that's the way I'd like to see your decision-making going, is to provide adequate protection for bicyclists that are on the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Anyone else want to comment from the public? Okay. So what are we thinking on this one?
I just wanted to add, we did a similar project in Ottawa where we took 59 Highway, the old 59 on the north side of town, and took 4 lanes and turned it into 3, basically 1 lane each direction, 2-way center left turn lane, and then bike lanes, and that's worked really, really well. I think, you get some initial feedback occasionally with people that don't like it, but that goes away pretty quick. And 9th Street, I think, is a good example of that, where it used to be really difficult to ride a bike on that street, and now it's not easy, but it's a lot easier than it used to be. So anyway, those are my 2 thoughts. I think it'd be a good start, and hopefully it could continue on south, as far as we could get it, but it'd be a good start there.
I would agree. I agree that it's awkward going south on Mass around 13th, 14th, and 15th. I'm still confused and alert when I'm doing that. For me to bike from 18th and Mississippi to Mass, I'm probably in that 2/3 of being somewhat uncomfortable in a stripe. I'm trying to get a little bit beyond that, but it's not happening too quickly. But with this, I may consider, I essentially go to the Burroughs Trail and then cut in on 10th Street to get downtown. And I get a little extra mileage out of the deal, which is okay, but there's times when I'd probably just as soon be more expedient. And I think this, I agree with David. I think in the long run, south to 23rd, what everybody been saying, would be a really big deal for Lawrence. And this might actually be a good step, I think. So, sounds good.
So, and this is just lane reconfiguration, mill and overlay. So it shouldn't change the size of the road.
Correct.
Okay.
So I'm kind of interested, I know a couple of you have mentioned it, and it isn't really in the proposal, but it's more than 5 years, it's not in the CIP right now to do any other mill and overlay on South Mass. So really, those of us that are at this table tonight may not be here in 5 years. I would kind of like to know what it would actually take to get the lane reconfiguration on the entire stretch of road. And I know it's not up for mill and overlay, but it's possible to restripe a road without that. So I'd be curious if anyone would like to understand like the extent of that cost, if it would be, when we think about, the bike ped funding, if that would be a significant enough project that we could say, yeah, we should spend money to do that, even though the road won't be, milled and overlaid.
I'd like to pursue both of them concurrently but separately because I suspect that we have a timing deadline on the SIP money. And the other part of that project may be drugged down with just public comment, and it may take a little bit longer than this section would. And I'd hate to lose money on this section while you're trying to get that remaining section done.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that it could be lost on future commissions that there's
pursue
a bigger
it.
project.
Pursue
so
it,
how do we make some progress on that?
Yeah.
Even if it's ultimately decided it's just too expensive to do it, we just need to wait until maintenance happens on this road. I think the big question is, could you get buffer bike lanes along the entire corridor? If that's even feasible, what would it cost? And if we wait 10 years, what will it cost if that's...
Or at least try to get it down to an connection point like 19th Street or something like that, because you got bike lanes down there on 19th and then 21st. And, maybe we don't get all the way to 23rd, but let's go to a place where we connect into something.
21st would make a lot of sense. That's where there was discussion about a bike boulevard.
Yeah, I think without 21st, I've tried that route. I live over by West Campus and headed down 21st. I think you kind of have to take it out to 21st because that's where it would connect in, sort of.
There are some bike lanes on 19th Street from Barker east. I don't know if they go all the way to Mass, but yeah, it's a hard tie-in point, but whatever we can get built, is a step ahead.
Just one question about the actual design of the intersection. This comment that Carol had about the rounded corners. This project doesn't have it doesn't actually provide funding to do any redesign of the intersection, correct? Or
Yes.
Yeah, we could add, we would certainly look at redoing ADA ramps and sidewalks in the area. I mean, these are federal funds, and so those type of improvements would be automatic with the project. I don't know what the particular question is with the curves.
I think just the radius is a little loose, so it doesn't slow cars down from making that turn.
That could be looked at. As far as the scope of the project and the budget, it would, if we're getting into redoing curbs and modifying the intersection, it could be beyond the scope of the project, but those type of things are, could be done with safety money if it can show that it will reduce the cause of crashes. So typically what this grant opportunity does is you present the crash history and the crash reports, and KDOT will look through those and see the numbers, and they have some formulas and calculations based off of, if you do a project to provide a center turn lane, it could reduce that crash. So they would take there's some objectivity to reviewing the crash data and the studies to see if what you're doing would mitigate the crash. So as far as changing the curb radius, if it was an area where the curb radius is large and people were traveling around at the higher speeds and that was causing crashes, it could then trigger that improvement, or that money could go to redoing curb radiuses and et cetera. But we do look at pedestrian crossings and other improvements outside of the roadway when we do these type of projects. So it could certainly be looked at when we look at design details for the project.
I mean, and also, it's such a high number of pedestrian area. It just seems like something that would be useful, so I'd like to see that too.
So if we wanted to approve the highway safety improvement funds for the project, Dave, how would we also direct staff to provide information to us about extending that to 21st Street, to doing a lane reconfiguration with or without the mill and overlay? I mean, could that just be a staff report that you?
Yeah, it might be a good idea that might be a good study session topic to discuss what all goes into that. When you start getting through major intersections like 19th and Massachusetts Street, where you have high volumes of traffic, it becomes more difficult to remove through lanes of traffic because queuing of traffic will back up and level of service will go down significantly. So intersections become challenging for these type of projects when you're reducing lanes. So there are other things to think about. I mean, if we were looking to go to 21st Street, those are things that we need to look at, what level of service would change and how that would look. So we could, I guess I would recommend if you want to proceed with the two separate paths, that approve this, and we can begin looking at design options and contacting neighbors and those that are impacted by the project to develop, get some data on the parking, and then proceed with design options. But then at the same time, talk about what the rest of the corridor could look like and what the expense would be to do to extend the bike lanes, or to do some type of lower cost where you have bike lanes in certain segments, and then until you get to intersection improvements, what those different incremental costs could be throughout the corridor. So, I think it could be a good study session
Okay.
type thing for the future.
Well, I think we can do the study session agenda separately then, but thank you for that. All right, is there any other discussion? And can we get a motion to approve the highway safety improvement funds for this project?
So motion.
The motion is made by Commissioner Hurt and seconded by Commissioner Hamby to approve the highway safety improvement funds for the intersection of 13th and Massachusetts. This is him to provide direction on scope. Did you want us to specifically include that in the motion? I'm thinking we were talking about the buffered bike lane. Is that?
Yeah, and I think I don't think we need specific direction on the scope in the motion, but I think we would look at coming back and what these different options with what the impacts are to parking and what the costs are for extending the project out further than just the 13th Street intersection to see what we could do with the cost of milling and overlaying or just going out and removing the striping and then
All right, then the
bring that back.
motion is just to approve the highway safety improvement funds for the intersection of 13th and Massachusetts. Any other discussion? Any other comments from the public? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Please say nay if you're opposed. And any abstentions? Motion passes. We're now on item number 7, the pedestrian and bicycle prioritization criteria.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jessica Mortinger, and I'm the Senior Transportation Planner with the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm here this evening. We coordinated with David and his staff and some draft proposed criteria put together to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian improvements based on currently approved planning documents and conversations we've had in terms of with the community through the public process like the Bike Ped Issues Task Force. The City Commission has budgeted $450,000 over the next 3 years, and staff have been directed to prioritize by standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects to put together like a capital improvement plan for these standalone projects. The criteria are really looking that we heard was important to look at in terms of a data-driven approach to prioritize, really focuses on safety, priority networks or the existence of the facility or improvement in an approved network and an approved plan, and then looking at proximity to destinations for pedestrians, which really talks about opportunity and demand, and bicycle demand, which is calculated on a bunch of different factors that we've shown. We really wanted to find something that was simple enough but also data-driven that uses, because you have a short time frame for looking at prioritizing projects for these next 3 years, looking at data that's available from previous plans and studies and current GIS data sets, and then recognizing that that the funds will split and you can prioritize projects, pedestrian, and then possibly a set aside with ramps, which you could prioritize separately, and then bikeway projects. We want to look specifically at the criteria for each mode that we've proposed, and this is just a starting point for this conversation. I think since there hasn't been a data-driven approach to prioritization for projects before, I think this is a conversation and a process. We're starting this conversation, and so we've just put some together. So we'll be looking for feedback from you in terms of, do we have the right priorities? Do we have the right things? Is there other things we need to be considering? Another consideration will be, how will this change over time as more additional data becomes available, or as we work on improved processes for prioritization based on a data-driven approach. For pedestrian prioritization, we really look at three things, there's three categories for each prioritization. The pedestrian one looks at priority networks. So both the regional pedestrian plan, which was supported by the input in the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report, looked at a priority network for pedestrian improvements, focusing the highest level improvements on completing safe routes to school networks and an arterial and collector sidewalks along those streets. And so kind of prioritization in that fashion, with the highest priority going to safe routes. Then looking at pedestrian access to priority destinations in terms of proximity. So this particularly focuses on access around schools, transit stops, neighborhood and community retail, which supports the grocery store and farmers market and other retail foods supported by the food systems plan and access to food, parks and libraries and post offices, kind of community amenities. And then it looks at crash history. So is there a crash history in this location, or is the project along a higher volume, higher speed roadway, or does it improve a crossing along a roadway over 15,000 AADT? The bikeway one kind of mirrors that, but uses a little bit different language to describe that priority, with three categories again. The first being, is it in an unapproved plan? And but this is where it differs a little bit, because these plans don't say the exact same thing. The Ped Bike Issues Task Force report identified a priority network for bikeways. And so that network gets a set of criteria or points to it. And then there's the county-wide bikeway plan. So you'd get the highest level of points based on whichever network it's improved in. Basically, in the countywide bikeway plan, our consultants from that previous study created a process to assess bicycle demand. So that includes existing and future latent demand. So the idea that you should improve networks and make the most investments where you have the best opportunity to attract riders. In that, based on housing density, school and university access, existing facilities, and so that kind of puts together a scoring factor based on those criteria that creates a demand heat map. Our GIS staff reverse engineered the version that our consultants had previously made for us. And so we haven't finalized that model, but we'll be able to update that and keep that updated in the future. And then the third consideration is, again, to safety, with the same factors given to bikeway as they are to PED, but rated on their own matrix. And so that's kind of what we proposed, and I'd open that to any questions or conversation you would like to have about this. I think probably the next steps would be we could collect whatever feedback you have if we need to amend whatever criteria and direction we need to go in. And then the next step would probably be assessing the list of projects for both of these and building the GIS model for us to be able to give scores to projects and show you then kind of where those come out. And then there'll still be room to talk about the criteria, but we really wanted a forward approach. Let's talk about the most important criteria first before we see how any particular project weighs in that criteria. Questions?
Thank you, Jessica.
So I just have a quick question on the pedestrian infrastructure. When you're talking about an 1/8 mile of a transit stop, that's any transit stop and not just a transit stop to get to a school, correct?
Correct. Those are two separate factors. So we actually, let me show you what that looks like in terms of, we're in the process of working on a lot of this, so it's not all complete, but let me show you what that particular network looks like. Eek. Maybe I'm not going to show you.
An error 404. Papers.
No, I'm not going to show you. But basically, it creates a level 5 rating in that buffer, and then a level 3 in the next set of criteria, and a level 1 in the next set of criteria.
Right.
If you want to go back, I can give you that.
Yeah.
It's
What did I have wrong?
I'm seeing that. It says within 1/4 mile of school or 1/8 mile of transit stop is a 5. I'm seeing that. I was just clarifying whether that was just general transit
Yeah, it'd be any stop.
Okay,
We have a
yeah.
designated stop system. There's hundreds
Right.
of stops. It'd be any
That's all I
GIS point
needed was
for a
that
stop,
clarification,
correct?
so.
Is there,
Yeah, I don't know why it's not working.
Is the,
I'm good, that answers my
Okay.
question.
is the distance measured by the like network analysis, or is it a buffer?
I would have to ask our GIS staff to clarify that.
Okay.
I don't know how he ran that for putting that together.
Question about
Okay.
process.
Mhm.
Would you all be doing the evaluation, the numerical evaluation, and giving that to us? Or would we be participating in that discussion while it's happening? And I'll make a comment after you
Okay.
answer that question if you can.
So I think so for example, we agree to run a primary draft of the criteria. All of this will be GIS driven, so there's going to be a model built that basically assigns points based on what the data tells us it either is or isn't. So we would have, like, for example, for pedestrian projects, we would put together a line file of all the missing sidewalk segments along safe routes and arterial and collector streets. So we'd start with the highest level ones that, are coming up, or, and start to feed projects, starting with a high level of projects to feed into this model. And we'd come up with a scoring matrix, I assume. And then in the future, any requested project to be considered as part of that process could get added in that fashion in terms of however frequently the process is to evaluate projects as you prioritize. So I don't know that we've set the final, like, here's going to be the process. I think that's part of the conversation where you feel comfortable in terms of, do we have the right criteria first? Then can we start talking about what projects need to be considered? Obviously, our first go-to as staff is what we've heard from the Bike Ped Issues Task Force and what we have in approved plans in terms of project lists, that we would start with prioritizing things that have been through a process. And then I think we would have to have a conversation about what's the process to add projects to get evaluated in that matrix. And that would be conversations that you could give future direction probably to us. David might have another time frame. Obviously, the budget time frame is going to play into that. If you're looking at setting projects for that process, or if you want to have it as part of a conversation about future proposed sales tax, then some of that will lend its way to setting how we facilitate a process, depending on what the goal is.
Well, my comment is, I've used data like this before, and I always ask the question, is it the end of the discussion or the beginning of the discussion? And by that, it's pretty easy to go to data and just say, oh gee, well, there's the decision. And I think being part of the process is important for us to be a little more subjective about that. I think this is great, really. I think it's an incredible guideline. I would like to see some examples. Maybe in one of our work sessions, we could do a what if on a real easy one, perhaps, both a bike and a pedestrian, and just kind of see how this works. But I'm just, my fear is to get the data and be a little too relying on the data a little too much.
Sure.
And I think there's more to it than that.
Well, and I would say historically two things. One, there hasn't really been a data-driven approach to selecting and prioritizing projects. It's really been based on requests or grant applications that the city submitted for specific TA projects. So this would be a new approach that I think sets a different tone as you start the conversation. It's not whoever makes the loudest request. It's not whoever participated in this process and had a goal. It's like, bring all the plans together and look at this based on the priorities that the community told us are important through all of these processes, which are safety, access and opportunity for destinations, and it's in an improved plan. And I would say that's probably the beginning of the discussion, because there are going to be projects that, a couple different things. One, that either weigh the same, so you're going to have to maybe still decide, or there could be projects where if you only have $450,000 a year and a project costs $2 million, now do you divide that over years? Do you save money? Do you prioritize other projects first because of that? So there's still going to have to be a conversation about priority that happens as part of the this discussion to build criteria, but also after when you make your final recommendation to the commission.
Okay.
Jessica, was there some discussion in developing this about how to include connectivity as a criteria?
There was. The challenge really becomes in some of the data and the availability of how the data networks are built in terms of that. The idea behind connectivity for the pedestrian one really gets into those primary networks. So if you're looking at completing a connected network for safe routes to school as the top priority, then that's where connectivity plays into the pedestrian element of rating in terms of we're saying these connections are the biggest priority. For the bikeway one, it plays more into the bikeway demand, in which connectivity isn't the only value, but it's also kind of more a factor of demand where if you notice, particularly in the bikeway, that demand one where existing facilities are one of the considerations. But with that, it's more sporadic in terms of where connections are, in terms of proximity in some of them. And so also housing and destinations of schools play into that in terms of identifying kind of demand areas where there might be latent demand, based on kind of best practices with available data to assess, can you build off the existing network, but also consider how demand plays into recognizing that just because you have a lot of infrastructure and you might connect an extra quarter mile to some existing shared use path on the west end doesn't mean that's the highest demand bicycling area. And so it's kind of a balance of both of those. I think you also get the connectivity in the bikeway one by looking at kind of that priority network, and then is it on an approved network in the bikeway plan. The conversation becomes more challenging when you start to talk about timelines and available data in terms of it's possible in the future, I think, that if there's a better way proposed to talk about how we want to measure or assess connectivity by rating stuff, that we could do that, but based on the kind of the guidelines to start processing a priority list as part of a budget to talk about in terms of the sales tax and proposed projects, then the timeline doesn't really allow for you to have enough time to weigh into that process if we need to build something that takes a lot longer.
And was there a discussion about the environmental justice areas and where investments are being made, like how the...
Yeah, so that is a consideration. Obviously, the MPO does a lot of planning and defines environmental justice areas in terms of transportation impacts to those communities. Part of the challenge and the win in that is that if you look at what I had hoped to show you, but we don't have finished, in terms of the proximity to destinations, because of how our grid network is designed and how EJ plays into that, you find that a lot of those would receive duplicate scores because they're in similar areas. It could be something that we consider. We can look at that and add that as a data factor if you want to give us that direction. In no community conversation or plan has a public group ever said that we should prioritize projects in environmental justice areas over non-environmental justice areas. And so that would be a new conversation to have.
Yeah, I think it's fairly technical question. I don't know if anybody, public really gets it, but there is often discussion about where money's being directed, and it would seem important that we pay attention to how investments are balanced around the community. So maybe if not EJ, then some other concern, because that
and
comes
it's
up
possible that could be something, this is, like I said, a text criteria to start the conversation, and possibly there's, added text to explain the process later that Steve had mentioned also, which is that the commission has to determine all these other things. And so cost of projects, available funding, impacts and balance spread over the community are other considerations that are taken into account when the final list is given. And I think you would want to explain that to the community.
Jessica, I just have one comment, I guess, that pedestrian access to priority destinations, this kind of ties over to transit stops, but I'm thinking medical clinics or hospital or retirement centers, where you have some, maybe some older people or people that aren't driving that need to be able to walk to someplace. Hopefully that overlap on transit. But if they didn't, maybe we add in a section there that's part of the community retail or, something like that.
And I'm not sure how those points are all identified in this process.
Yeah.
Our GIS staff put that together, so I think that would be something to clarify and something we could definitely add in terms of proximity to those services, community services.
One comment I have on the safety section, or maybe a clarification. To me, when I look at this, it would rate a project that would keep a bikeway on 23rd higher than moving it away to say 21st. If higher volume traffic provides a higher score.
Yeah, I
Is that-
understand.
So it might keep us from doing some of the things that we talked about even this evening about, maybe the goal isn't to keep that traffic on a higher volume road, but to move it to a safer
And
route.
we talked about that in terms of, and I think maybe it just didn't get translated into this Jeff, because it makes a really good point, which is in the PED network, I think that we maybe intended it to be on that classification of roadway or a parallel roadway if that's replacing that roadway.
Right.
So that the issue becomes in how do you teach the model how to do that, and there's some things like that that are just gonna be, we have to do the technical back end process and ensure that it's consistent with that, or weigh those things. And I need
It
to
sounds like
ask.
a really tricky thing to model.
Yeah,
without
well, and the
knowing where
idea
those
was, how do you
areas
create a
would be.
process where you're not sending staff to basically assess 500 possible projects where you have to go and say, yes, it's on a safe route, yes, it's this, yes, it's this, and then if something changes, you basically, how do you create that process that can be replicatable to start the conversation about prioritization?
Any other questions? Thanks, Jessica. I think there are people from the public that want to address this. All right. Thanks for being so patient, Marilyn.
And others.
Yes, and everybody else.
Again, I'm Marilyn Hull. I'll add that I was chair of the Pedestrian Bicycle Issues Task Force, which spent a whole lot of time discussing these issues. And first thing I want to say is thank you to Jessica, because I do think that the rubric you created embodies a lot of the things that we discussed. And I know that might not have been easy, so I want to thank you for that good work. Just a couple of comments. One is regarding the pedestrian environment. I'm wondering how this relates to the current policy that's in limbo regarding who pays for sidewalks. And you're talking about directing pedestrian money. If I can see doing ADA ramps, but if you're actually putting in sidewalks on some of these arterial and collector and safe routes to schools, how does that relate to the question of who pays for sidewalks? So that's the one thing. My other thing is just to echo a couple things that Charlie mentioned about connectivity and environmental justice. What I would hate to have happen would be for something to score really high and yet not provide an important connection between point A and point B. So I recognize the difficulty in coming up with metrics for that, but that was such an important part of the task force recommendations that we should really look at filling in gaps and creating connected networks rather than more standalone facilities that aren't connected. In terms of environmental justice, I don't know that the task force included that in its pedestrian priorities. However, if you look at that report in the language, in more than one place, there's attention given to making sure that areas that have low and moderate income housing get special attention, with the idea that there tends to be more people who are going to be on foot or on bike simply because they may not be able to afford to own a car. I do think that's important, and especially in the long run as you consider this rubric going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wasn't going to come tonight.
Thanks for coming, Carol.
Jessica, you did a fantastic job on this rubric. I was amazed. I have some comments. I am really excited about us starting with the safe routes to school for 2 reasons. That's our highest pedestrian population, and secondly, it impacts every neighborhood in the city. So we're sending a signal out there that we're starting to move forward, all with one project. So I think that's great. I am concerned about the cost of ADA ramps. They are really expensive. They eat up the budget really, really fast. The city has already been putting in the ramps. The city, I'm sure, at least that's my impression, is worried about liability issues because they've been going up for about 3 years now. I've seen all over. So to take the little tiny budget that we have for pedestrians and include the ADA ramps, I'm a little concerned about that because, and this would be extreme, I know Chuck Souls wouldn't do this, all of them could be ADA ramps and he still wouldn't be done. And we wouldn't have any money left for anything else. So I am concerned. I have confidence in this commission and in the city that there will always be the human element. The rubric is great, but if you rely on it totally, that's not good. You do have to have the human element involved. And then, because I'm older and I can flip off anytime I want, this is not for new development. New development should develop. When they do their road, they do the bike lanes, they do the bicycles, and it has nothing to do with this budget. At least that was not our intent. So we had done that in the past. We threw together whatever we can. We've got to get out of that habit. And then there's this one minor thing on crossing streets. When we have long streets, Cassold is one of them. I asked that question at the time. Where does a pedestrian cross? And drivers are like arrows. They just straight shot from A to B. Pedestrians are like ants. You don't know where they're going and you have no control over it. They're just going to go wherever, and they can change their minds. There's no predictability. So what we need to do is provide the facility for them to do that and yet maintain some kind of organization at intersections and whatnot. Like the one with the school was at Harvard and something else with a 4-way stop. To me, it's absolutely incredible that you wouldn't have crosswalks in all 4 corners. It's a 4-way stop. We're letting the safe routes to school dictate what the city does, or the city dictate, I'm not sure what. But it's just a 4-way stop. Why isn't a crosswalk on all 4? It's for pedestrians. Pedestrians don't have age. Nothing gripes me more than to use an example of a senior as a reason to put in a traffic light or a crosswalk. It's for any pedestrian who wants to get across the street. If the pedestrian's 8 years old or the pedestrian's 73 years old, does not matter. They still need to get across the street. So when you have those long streets, those long blocks, how is a pedestrian going to cross? That is a big question. I'd like to see that one on here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So let's have discussion on this one.
I'd just like to echo that importance of the human element in this and really thinking about what can the model do and what can't the model do, and how do we make sure that we're evaluating those projects with that in mind. So I think that's probably all I'll say.
Yeah, I was imagining that it would actually be helpful to stipulate those considerations that might be important to this commission and future commissions that can't quite be captured in a model just yet. I mean, because those might also be the aspirational components to the future model as it's refined over time. I think connectivity is really essential when you have limited funds and you're trying to think where to spend it. You want to build something that people can use, and if it's too small, people question even what's going on. It's kind of why I was asking about South Mass, you know. If all they get is 2 blocks or 3 blocks with this new buffered bike lane, that might leave people puzzled. So if they can see there's a bigger picture, but I don't know how would the additional buffer bike lanes score? In my mind, that would be a high priority if it creates a continuous facility that people can be, drawn to use. So, what else do we need to think about for this?
See how it works.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just getting too late because it is later than normal, but I'll just keep talking. You guys, if you want to talk, you can shut me up. But one of the big challenges with bikeway prioritization, I think, is that there are so many different types of bike facilities that certain types of facilities appeal to certain types of bicyclists, and it would seem important to me to think about what type of facility do we prioritize. The Ped Bike Issues Task Force ultimately prioritized shared use paths and bicycle boulevards. And if you were to, create a kind of a scale of which is going to attract the most new cyclists, it's, those are the 2 types we thought are the most, create the greatest sense of comfort and safety, and should be the priority if there's limited funds. We also talked about painting bike lanes, because that's got to be, maybe that's cheap and we can get a lot done for a small amount of money, but ultimately there's such a small group of people that would use that 3 foot of pavement with a white line that it didn't seem like the right thing to do. So I think one thing that's not captured in here that I think perhaps is through the inclusion of the Bike Ped Issues Task Force recommendation would be just how different types of bike facilities have the potential to create a safe environment for people that are concerned. I'm not sure how you do that, because it's, if you could say, how does a buffer bike lane stack up against a protected bike lane on South Mass? The South Mass with a buffer bike lane wouldn't score as well as South Mass with a protected bike lane. So does the model allow us to input if it was this kind of facility versus that kind of facility?
So the assumption that we're making about this is that we're taking the list of projects that's either given to us by the countywide bikeway plan in segments or the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report of the priority network in those segments that have to be broken up and then analyzed. So part of that conversation then I think Charlie comes back to is, does there need to be a larger conversation in the community about, do we have the right types of facilities in our approved plans? And there's going to be a great opportunity probably to talk about that in 2018, because the NPO is going to be likely pursuing work to update the countywide bikeway plan to reconcile the differences between all of the different approved plans right now.
So I was thinking about the comment with where a pedestrian is pedestrian, and I think if you consider the human element, that's kind of the opposite, because I think even with bicyclists and pedestrians, like, a 7-year-old on a bike is going to act differently than Steve would act on a bike, and a 7-year-old pedestrian is going to act differently than an adult pedestrian, and they're not going to necessarily look at it, follow rules the same way. Whereas, you know, somebody who is blind or perhaps in a wheelchair is going to demand a different set of standards. So looking at the human element, I think, you know, there are individualistic characteristics to certain age groups as far as pedestrians and bicyclists and even drivers. And they're not all the same. That's my comment.
Is there anyone that hasn't said much that might want to throw in what their thoughts are? So you're just looking for a discussion of it tonight. What is the next step for this?
So my thought would be if you have any direction to us of improvements or changes you'd like to see to this before we put projects, you know, before we start looking at those projects and those approved plans and coming back out with a list. If there are those types of considerations, I heard a few, but if there's something you really want us to work to do, either based on the public comments or your thoughts, then we would need to know, we should know that now. Part of what I would say too, Charlie, you know, you talk about design of infrastructure. This project, this model really is just telling us what location in our community should be prioritized.
Yeah.
The design and consideration about users is where the human element in that conversation is going to have to come into play when you solicit input again from the public and talking about that until we have an opportunity to update a plan to more accurately reflect kind of the current sentiment of what types of facilities the community is desiring. And so I think I've heard that we definitely need to add to the text to describe how that process is going to work to people, particularly probably before we come out with a list and somebody assumes that whatever's at the top of the list is going to get funded, that we can add descriptive language to explain how you envision using that process.
I really think that, you know, this thing can evolve.
Yes.
And I think in time, we're going to learn more about it by using it. And to try to, you know, fine tune it, you know, to that degree,
But we could
doesn't
say
make a lot
that.
of sense to me. That's why I'm saying, let's use it, see how it goes. It's got to be something that's relatively dynamic, although I think you've done a great job, but we've got to be open-minded when we use it. And it's hard for me to kind of look at this and, you know, kind of pick at it. Well, I think you ought to do this, or this ought to be a 4.
Yeah.
I think we'll learn a lot from using it.
And
I do think for me, just a quick example would be good, you know, in one of the Thursday sessions. Just pick one and take us through it quickly and ready to go.
I think in addition to the providing context to the public who might read this, Marilyn asked the question about gaps in repairs. I think that would be an important thing given kind of the current kind of uncertainty about what the policy is. You know, my interpretation is if there's a repair that's, if there's a sidewalk that's needs to be repaired and it's a city responsibility, then that would probably fit inside this, but I don't know. I mean, I just assume because right now if the city is responsible for the ramp or there's a sidewalk that's been, needs repair because of a tree or sewer system, then all those are part of they're looking for the same funding source, you know, so.
No,
I think clarifying that would be good for us, good for the public.
Yeah, we're developing this to fund standalone projects and not do maintenance. So this isn't, the money's would not be intended to go to maintenance projects. The city will still be responsible for those issues and we'll address them as we can, but we're not going to proactively do maintenance with the money. As far as the sidewalk ramps go, I think that's going to be a decision that that we'll need to make on how much money we set aside out of the pedestrian money, assuming that we agree to do 50/50. Right now, we have $450,000 budgeted for 17, 18, and 19. And so if we do a 50/50 split, we would need to set aside an X amount of dollars for sidewalk ramps so that we're not just doing all the sidewalk ramps and not any other projects. So there's going to be some discussion that we'll need to have on how to break it out. And then we would use, the idea would be to use the same criteria on the pedestrian network for the ramps to prioritize, well, you know, if we're going to spend $100,000 in the ramps this year, let's do the ones that are going to make the most impact. That's, I think what we're looking at, this is kind of a standalone project, so we wouldn't be doing maintenance on areas that would be the property owner's responsibility.
I think that would, but also not maintenance on city responsibility.
Not maintenance on city
Yeah,
responsibility.
I think that's helpful to clarify, especially for those that have been asking for so long to have standalone funding.
That's the way we're laying out the criteria now. You know, ultimately, we'll make recommendations. You guys will make recommendations on how to spend that money. It will go to the city commission, and they will have the final determination on how it gets spent.
I think another thing that's, I know in the proposal for the sales tax renewal, there's a separate line item for matching funds, so that in theory wouldn't be competing with this kind of line item. But this is for the next 3 years. And it's my understanding that some of this funding, you know, has been committed to the Safe Routes to School application, you know, if that is approved. And so I'm not sure where you come up with the prioritization of the $450,000 if we're kind of also holding it as a way to leverage for other, you know, KDOT funds.
Well, right now, we have not allocated any of the 2017 funds. So we did use some 2016 funds on Safe Routes to School project that we're working on. But as far as the last 2 applications that we did for the next Safe Routes to School and 19th in Iowa, those are just applications. So if we get awarded funds, we'd have to make a decision on whether to accept them, and we could follow the criteria or not. And certainly different grant applications have their own criteria that they use to score amongst the other projects that they get from other communities. So it's not directly related to this, but there would still be opportunity to use the money for 2017 for other projects, or to just go directly off of our city criteria that we're developing to.
What I was kind of getting at is there's another criteria that is often used is there a chance we could pull down more money by picking this project? The other criteria that seems like it's been used is timing. You know, the 19th Street intersection with Iowa, it wasn't so much that was the best place for people to cross in a tunnel. It was the most affordable time to do that would be now. You know, some might argue there's a better place, like 7th Street would be the place to put that crossing, or 9th Street or something. But that criteria of timing seemed to trump a lot of that, which was hard, I think, for the public to understand. So getting maybe back to how do you put the caveats in a document that might be read by the public so they understand that there are a lot of factors, that this is one thing to assist us and to create maybe a standardized approach, but it's only one consideration. There's still these other considerations that might actually be more
Yeah,
impactful.
I think, for example, all of the Safe Routes to School missing segments that were just part of the recent TA application are going to show up in this rating.
Yeah.
Because they're currently still missing, and we haven't, even though we applied for funding and prioritized them in that application process, we haven't had that conversation if that money's not available, what local funds, where would they fall in that prioritization? And so I think let us probably bring back some text about context with some of those things, and I think it goes at the very beginning of this, whatever we put together in terms of how we anticipate it being used. And then I think, like Steve said, a part of it's going to have to be, you know, we're going to see how it works, and then if we need to talk about something else.
One last thing I guess I'll say before, I don't know if anybody else has anything else to say, but the task force and the adopted bike plan they clearly there were public processes that were in place, and so I think it's probably reasonably appropriate to say these represent the sentiment of the public, or some approximation of that. But there are going to be emergent ideas, such as Michael Allman's suggestion that Naismith shared use path be built in order to help connect people from KU to the Lawrence Loop. That was not even discussed by the task force. The bikeway plan, you know, was made a few years ago. So I'm thinking that as people's understanding of what's possible evolves, we have to have a way to say, yeah, we approve this as part of our, you know, worth 5 points kind of plan, or something to kind of allow us to recognize, while we may not update major plans every 5 years, we still have to react to the, you know, shift in thoughts about what should be done.
I would disagree. Actually, that Naismith is included in the priority long-term network in the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report.
Oh, it's in there. So it got captured.
And it would also be, even though it's a facility, you know, in the thing. So it is, for example, in that one.
As
But
a
I
shared
think-
use path?
Yes, because you called for that entire network to be shared use path.
Okay.
That was the vision that we discussed.
In
as
which
part of
plan
that.
was it?
The Ped Bike Issues Task Force report. It's identified as the gray line on the map as your long-term network.
Oh, we did get it in there. You know, I don't honestly recall that.
We had this conversation.
So Michael,
I was thinking,
when
did
he's,
they get in there?
when Michael, he's brought that up, he is not creating a new idea.
Well, so he was there.
Well, I mean,
when we
he
were
has that
trying to-
as a priority project, but
Okay.
it has been recognized in your
Well, then
long-term
my
network.
example doesn't really hold up, but
Yeah.
the idea behind it?
Yes, I think.
The idea
I think
behind it
that-
is that, you know, 2 years from now, like even, like the task force, you know, it was a moment in time, so I wonder how,
Well, and part of that has to be the consideration in terms of how is the sales tax going to be approved? Because like the roadway one, if it's going to be laid out to say, these are the projects, and you go through that
Right.
process, then you don't have that opportunity until whenever you have the process again. And so part of it's just going to have to be timing and an evolution to see when do you start making that decision. And now that you've started this new process, you're doing it one time, how often do you do it? Do you do it annually if you have different money? Do you do it every 3 years as part of, you know, as part of a CIP process? And that conversation, I think you can help tell staff how you want that process to evolve. But the budget process is also going to play into a fact of the timing issue.
well, this is great work. Thanks, guys. Any other? Okay. The next item on our agenda is commission items. Got an update on the Complete Streets Subcommittee?
Would you guys like for me to go for it, or? Catherine and Michelle and I met on the 27th, about a week and a half ago, and I think we describe it as more of a kickoff meeting, not getting to any real decision-making this early in the game, but trying to get our arms around this. And just in terms of organization, I'd probably refer to myself as a facilitator, committee chair, whatever you want to call it. We'll all help Catherine with the notes and documenting this, and hopefully we can get that out in a timely way so everybody can see what's going on. We probably have a couple of areas here, consideration for other members on the committee. And I'm going to ask questions of everybody on the commission and the staff to give us some input, not necessarily tonight, but keep it in your minds to get back with us. But the three of us kind of feel like we probably, the freshness of what we bring to the table is a good thing. Obviously, we have a lot to learn, but I think there may be good reason to have staff participation in this subcommittee, whether that be Public Works or MPO or interns involved, or, you know, someone that can be there to help us with questions we're going to have along the way. That would be a resource for us. So Dave, Jessica, Nick, everybody, think about that for us, what you think is right there. And also from the general public, there are a lot of people that come to these meetings that have a lot of information, good resources. I think we concluded that it would probably be best to find out who those people are and tap into their knowledge and resources when we feel like we need it. I don't think at this stage of the game we think it's necessary to have a public member of the committee. I don't know what the protocol would be, but I think that we could probably accomplish quite a bit with a subcommittee that reports publicly in this environment and to you all. So that's another consideration. And, you know, I've obviously, in the 8 months we've been here, I recognize some people that bring in a lot of valuable information and help us identify who those people are and what they may bring to the table in terms of knowledge and resources. We need to develop a list of resources, websites, technical manuals, organizations such as the Complete Streets Coalition. Are there other organizations like that that we need to be aware of? So that'd be a question for everybody. Some of the folks that go back in transit and ped and bike stuff can really help us there and share your resources. We know we need to define a purpose. We've thought about what that primary task would be, but we think that, I think along the lines of what you showed us tonight, Jessica, in terms of priorities, I think it would be nice to have a system to look at evaluating complete streets, maybe in a numerical manner, but maybe in a checklist, but some type of kind of short, sweet, simple, at least we've looked at all these aspects of complete streets, and we've thought about them and asked questions as we go along. So I think we kind of landed on that as being kind of a big deal in going through the policy, which we all three have agreed to do before our next meeting, is really go through that policy in detail, understand what's there. You all have, Charlie suggested that it could probably be updated, but we need to get our arms around that a little bit too. And personally, I think checklists or matrices that evaluate aspects of complete streets would be good, as opposed to reading a 3 or 4 page document that, you know, may be organized well, but how useful is it, you know, to really look at a design or a concept for a complete street and get a decision and get opinions on the table as quickly as we can. So I think that's kind of our big idea right now, is to look at that as a goal. I think, you know, I really want to kind of get a structure for this with a work plan, with some key dates, with the strategy for measuring what we're doing. That's not going to come overnight, but I think good organizational planning for something like this would make a lot of sense. So again, that's a goal that we have in developing this. I mentioned reviewing the process or the current complete streets policy. Catherine, I don't know if you want to add anything else at this time about models for planning and mapping. Is it too early to do that? Okay. Need to identify the stakeholders who will be impacted by the policy. Some of those things are pretty obvious and some of them may not be. Generally, that was the discussion. We are going to meet every 2 weeks, starting on the 17th at 4 p.m. at Wheatfields. And we're going to go every 2 weeks until we kind of feel like we have our arms around it. We may go to once a month, but I just really don't think that something like this is going to move quickly enough, meeting for an hour or so once a month. So we're going to hit it every 2 weeks for a while and see how we go. Anything else? Thank you.
I just want to say thank you guys for taking on this work. I know you're maybe taking on more than you realize. Certainly from what you've said so far, it sounds like you've taken a pretty broad perspective on the work, so I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you. Anyone else have a commission item? I just have one question. Jessica, the bike ped counts that happen every year, do you have the date set for those? And are you interested in the Transportation Commission's help in getting that work done?
You'll see an announcement from us in the next week.
Okay.
We are doing those again this year. We would love to have you participate in terms of that project. Let me just give you a little more information about that. Every year, annually, we recruit volunteers as part of a process to document bicycle and pedestrian usage in our community. So we select locations based on a variety of regionally significant locations throughout all three of the larger community cities in our region, and have locations where we send volunteers out for 2-hour time periods to observe bikes and peds that cross a certain screen line, an invisible line on a map, and we document that. We have a process then that's based on a national documentation project where we can estimate counts for different corridors, and it gives us an idea of what type of mode share is happening for a particular street. For example, you talked about Massachusetts Street tonight. We've counted at South Park in that location before, and over the different years, 3 or 4 years we've observed anywhere from, based on our projections, 700 to 1,000 bikes and ped, and so that equates to something like 2 to 6% of the traffic in that specific corridor. So these are that's type of information that then we make available. We have it all on a GIS map that shows where we've counted in the historical volumes. That is just only made possible by the fact that we can send volunteers out to sit and observe. I know some of you might have volunteered for us in the past, and that's really helpful to us to grow our database of knowledge about how something is used in our community. It also helps justify additional facilities. For example, the 12th Street lighted pathway, we counted a 3 to 4-fold increase of bike ped use in just the evening times when the lights were activated since that's been built. And so we continue to do that in corridors where we know that there are planned capital improvement projects to be able to assess what we can project for usage. But we'll send out an email. You'll get the email, and if you know people that might be interested in volunteering, we ask you to watch just a short video, and then we make some materials available to you to do that.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, the next item is our calendar. Study session is on Thursday. Anyone? I'm not going to be here. I don't know who.
Dave, what's the topic?
We have the overview of the MUTCD, also the school traffic control policy, and the safe routes to school.
So it should be good if you're interested in the school stuff. The manual, I don't know, that's a tough one to get through. I just had a couple other things to add to the calendar. That was the last. We have the transit bus ride on August 24th also. That's, Steve and I stayed a little late and talked to Bob Nugent about getting a bus ride, and so we're planning that on the 24th. Meet at 7:50.
It's at 7th in Vermont.
7th in Vermont.
Yeah.
So get your first-hand experience of riding the bus. I just have 3 things to add to the calendar. The first is August 29th. We have a Safe Routes Champions training that, if you haven't got information about it yet, I'll make sure you do, because I think it's been shared out pretty broadly, but can't be for sure. The The other one has not been shared, but I'll forward the email to you, Dave. It's a regional Safe Routes to School Summit. It's not going to be hosted here in Lawrence. It'll be in Kansas City, Kansas. But it might be of interest to some people. It's September 13th. And that's an all-day, 9 to 3 event. I'll forward the email to you for that. And then on September 25th, I have a save the date announcement. Mark Fenton, who's a nationally renowned expert on bike ped kind of infrastructure and programs, he's going to be visiting Lawrence for a Safe Routes Town Hall that is sponsored by the Pedestrian Coalition and the Health Department, and whoever else wants to sponsor. I think LiveWell might be a sponsor too. So there were multiple sponsors the last time there was a town hall event. It was in 2015. So just save the date and I'll get more information. It's going to be in the evening at Liberty Hall. Starting at, doors open at 6:30. Event starts at 7.
Did you just say the 25th?
No, the town hall event is September 21st, if I didn't get that right.
Just want to make sure. I heard the 25th.
Oh, if I said the 25th, that's wrong. All right. Anything else? Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
By Commissioner Dillon, seconded by Commissioner who? Hamby. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Any abstentions? Meeting adjourned. Thanks for being here so late tonight, guys.